This conference will now be recorded.
That was funded by Travis County and was just recently released as a what's titled there, the Hydrogeologic Atlas of Southwest Travis County. Even though the study itself had a sort of focus area, today I'll really be talking a little bit more broadly of Hays and southwestern Travis County, and in particular the Trinity aquifers there and what we've learned over these past few years. Before I move on, I'd just like to acknowledge my co-authors, Lane Cockrell. I'm not sure if he's tuned in today, but Robin Gary, Dr. Brian Smith, Justin Camp, and then Vicki Kennedy at Travis County. Let's see here. Trying to advance. There we go, sorry. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction. I'll jump into the geology and the hydrogeologic story of the Trinity in both Travis and in Hays County. And mostly I'm pulling and talking about information and data we've gleaned from this recent study, the Hydrogeologic Atlas. And then at the end, I hope to make some broader conclusions or implications, the so what, what have we learned from doing all this work. So today, for those of you not familiar, I'll be talking, and broadly speaking, about the Trinity Aquifer, which is a major aquifer of Texas, extending from the Red River in North Texas all the way down to almost Mexico. I've indicated where Bell County is there, and really I'm talking about an area down to the south. So it's a portion of what's known as the Hill Country Trinity Aquifer, in particular Western Travis there and Hays County. And the current state of things that we're all working under is, and as the state water plan has identified, is we're currently in a situation where the demand exceeds the supply. We have these, and this is both surface and groundwater. We have finite resources, as the little cartoon demonstrates. We experience these huge climatic swings and pressure from drought conditions, and then on top of that, we have a population that is just exploding. And in Travis County in particular, we expect the population to double in the next 50 years. So it's with that backdrop that we know that the water resources will be stressed, and indeed we know that the Trinity Aquifer, again broadly speaking, is also a stressed resource. And this is a map that's in the Water Development Board report and showing water level drawdown of the Trinity Aquifer over the last 100 years. And you can see, if nothing else, it's just showing that there's a lot of stress that has occurred, the drawdowns exceeding 1,000 feet locally. And if you see that little box, that's the study area that I'll be talking about today. And you can see that it's really on the fringe edge of this broader drawdown. And so it sort of begs the question of, do we see that drawdown in this study area? And if so, is it related to the drawdown that's occurring, in Waco? So are these connected? So that's kind of one of the questions. I don't know that we truly answer that connection there, but we certainly get at it a little bit. So here's a focus map of what we're talking about here. Again, recognizing that the Trinity Aquifer is stressed. Back in 1990, the state designated the Hill Country portion of the Trinity as part of a priority groundwater management area, and that's an area that did experience or would expected to experience availability issues. And what that really did was prioritize the development of groundwater districts to try and maintain those resources. And the most recent groundwater district to be added to this area was southwestern Travis County, was voted in by the legislature and ratified by voters, a margin of 3-1, if I remember right, just this last fall. So it's a brand new groundwater district. Travis County identified this as an area that really didn't have a lot of information, and they wanted that groundwater district to hit the road running and have that sort of detailed hydrogeologic data in order to make policy decisions. And so they developed an ILA with interlocal agreement with my district, which is just adjacent to this area where we focused the study, and we conducted the work. So today, this is again a little more close-up view of the study area. And you can see, I just point out, this is the Colorado River running right through it with Lake Travis. So you'll see in the subsequent maps, you'll recognize Lake Travis throughout. Austin is just on the right-hand middle side of the page. And southwestern Travis County, this is the portion where the new groundwater district was created. That's about 25% by area of Travis County itself. And you'll see the study area also includes a good portion of Hays County. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is what we learned has really opened our eyes about southwestern Travis County. But what's also really interesting is if we compare it to what we know in Hays County, which is adjacent to it, how different these two systems respond to pumping. And it really illustrates the concept that was defined in the 1940s. This is a key hydrogeologic concept that all water discharged by wells is balanced by a loss of water somewhere. And in other words, there's two sources of water to a well, whether from storage, that is all the pore spaces in an aquifer, and so when you pump it, that decreases, and so the water level declines. And so that big drawdown map I just showed you is illustrating the water that has been pumped over the last 100 years has come from storage. We've seen water level declines. But the other side of the equation there is the source of water from what's called capture. And what that really means is when you pump a well, you're pulling water that would otherwise flow to a spring or a seep. So you're capturing the flow of the natural discharge of the system. In addition, you can also introduce new recharge. So if you were to pump and pull water in from, let's say, a lake or a river. And so really southwestern Travis County, as I'll kind of show in the story, and as I explain the story here, is that most of the water comes from storage. So water level declines that are very much like what I just showed in that broader drawdown map. Whereas in Hays County, it's the very same aquifer system, but just 15 miles to the south, we don't see those major declines in storage. We do see some decline, but what we see is the effects of capture, that is spring flow decreasing. So these are really two end members of this in the same aquifer system, and they're adjacent to each other. So it's really pretty interesting. So that's what I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about today. And I'll jump right into the geology. And again, the source of all this information comes from two Hydrogeologic Atlas publications. One we did in 2010, focused on Hays County, the other in 2020, more recently, that focused on southwestern Travis County. And these are both publications. They're both freely available. They're on the UT website, UT Digital Repository. And they're a compilation of all the basic data, geologic, hydrogeologic, into a series of maps and tables. And so it's not a whole lot of interpretive information there. It's really the compilation of all this, all the data. And so it's from these that I'll be pulling information from. And really what's at the root of both of these works is good geologic field work. And that includes doing, transects rivers. It means geologic mapping, measured sections. So it's really about the rocks and I guess that's one of the key things is that I've certainly learned is if we don't have a good handle on what the geology is doing, we will not understand the hydrogeology very well. And so I think that's the strength of both of these publications is they're very much rooted in the geology. And for example, here's Al Brown looking at cuttings coming out of a well. And so describing in detail the rocks and understanding the stratigraphy is paramount. And so here's an example of, this is our study area, and you can see there's Lake Travis on the top there. And all these points represent places or locations where we have a lot of detailed geologic data. So it allows us to map out the thicknesses or the locations of these different geologic units and then understand them in the aquifer context. So anyway, that's the strength of what I'm talking about today. And so just wanted to remind everybody of the stratigraphy that I'll be talking about. This is a cartoon sort of cross-sectional diagram showing the geologic units from the northwest, that is the Llano uplift on your left-hand side, to the right, to the southeast. And what it's showing are these Cretaceous units as they lap onto and pinch out up against the Llano uplift, which is ultimately the source of a lot of these units. So the geologic units, there's lots of names for these, but today I'll be talking about, for example, on the right-hand side, those are the aquifers that lump those geologic units together. So the lower Trinity is really a sand and gravel unit called the Sycamore Sand and Austin Formation and the Sligo Limestone. Those formations together form the lower Trinity. The middle Trinity, which is also a focus of what I'll talk about today, is composed of the Cow Creek Limestone, the Hensel Sandstone, and another limestone called the Lower Glen Rose. So these are the two aquifer units I'll really be talking about today and contrasting in Travis County versus Hays County. So just to remind folks about why these units are so different. So if we look on the left-hand side, this is a reconstruction of what the basal Cretaceous looked like. So when the lower Trinity was being deposited, the study area was essentially a coastal plain with rivers flowing to the ancestral Gulf of Mexico. And you'll see this Sycamore River is highlighted in blue there. Geologist Tom Ewing proposed that, and that's just a major river system that he postulated was draining the Llano area, and it flows right through southwestern Travis County. A little bit younger, as the seas encroached, then we had deposition of the middle Trinity type units, and this is where we had beach type environments. We had formation, so we had marine sediments, in other words, as opposed to in the earlier Cretaceous where it was more land-based type sediments. And why that matters? Well, one of the key geologic differences that we noted by looking at the cuttings and the outcrops and the geologic maps is, and this map on the right, if you kind of get your bearing, it's a little different from the others, but you can see Lake Travis that's there on, right on the top of that circle. What we've noticed is in that area that there were more sand was put into this area back in the Cretaceous, as opposed to the south, where we had less sand input, and therefore you had carbonate reef development that weren't inhibited by muddy waters, if you will. So that had a real lasting impression on the actual rock matrix itself and its permeability. So what does some of this look like? So that lower Trinity basal Cretaceous, I told you that Sycamore River system. So that's what it looks like on the left. There's a picture of an outcrop along the Colorado River, and that's river sediment. Those are cobbles and sands that were from a Cretaceous river. So that is the lower Trinity aquifer exposed. And this is from far western Travis County, maybe even eastern Burnett County. And we look on the next picture. This is what a middle Trinity unit looks like. This is the Cow Creek Formation. This is an ancient beach environment, okay? And this is also an important unit within the middle Trinity aquifer. So to conclude our rock shots here, this is from this is a reef unit within the Lower Glen Rose, and this is in Hays County, and this is what's called the Narrows along the Blanco River in western Hays County. And as I was saying about the increased sand that was in southwestern Travis County, there's less sand that allowed more development of reefs. And so this is an example of one of those reefs that's really well developed in Hays County. And this is a major aquifer of the Middle Trinity in the subsurface. And so you typically don't find this in southwestern Travis County, at least as well developed. And so we think that had implications for groundwater availability. So this is a geologic map showing the distribution of geologic units that I've briefly touched on, and what to really take away from this is you can again see the Lake Travis that's there in the top. And you'll see kind of one single color here in the middle of the map, and that's the upper Trinity, and that is blanketing all the deeper middle and lower Trinity units. Those middle and lower Trinity units are exposed where the rivers have incised into them. So here's the Pedernales and the Colorado River, and you can see these multiple other colors of green, if you will, and down in the south along the Blanco River. So this is where these units are exposed. The Trinity units are exposed at the surface. That's really kind of all you need to know. And in here, they're not exposed. And there's a couple of other important features that I want to point out. And one is this Bee Creek Fault, this big fault here on the west. You'll see it stops right about the Hays County line. Okay, and then you, of course, know the Balcones Fault system, and this is called the Mount Bonnell Fault or Tom Creek Fault if you're down in the south. So this is another important fault system. And in essence, what we can say about these is that both of these faults appear to be barriers to groundwater flow. So in essence, isolating this portion of the aquifer in southwestern Travis County. We don't see that same effect in Hays County. Okay, and in fact, the faults we think maybe have enhanced some of the permeability. So this is a geologic section. Again, this is from the Atlas, all of these maps and cross sections. And so this is from west to east, and you can see the different colors here represent the different geologic units. You'll notice that here's the Pedernales River out on the west and the Colorado River as well. And right here is that Bee Creek Fault, right in the middle. I assume you guys can see the cursor I'm moving. That may or may not be the case. Dirt, can you confirm that you can see my cursor moving?
Yes, I can. And then
you can, okay.
They have a big screen there as well.
Okay, all right, thank you. And so you'll see there's that Bee Creek Fault that I pointed out, and then way on the right, there's the Mount Bonnell Fault. And again, the point here is that these units are fault bounded. They're isolated between these faults, and what we think is that these faults are barriers to flow. And so what we're seeing is that these water levels, which you can see this dashed line here, are very much depleted because water is not allowed to replenish them. As opposed to the west side of that fault, these rocks are very much exposed to rivers and creeks and rainfall, and so there's a lot more surface water interaction or a lot more recharge, if you will. And so another aspect I'll say is that water that's in this vicinity tends to be older, tends to be more brackish, and as opposed to water on this west side, it tends to be fresher and tends to be younger. So again, reflecting its connection to the surface. So one of the things that as we looked a little bit deeper into southwestern Travis County, and again, Hays County we've been looking at for a long time, but this was a brand new look at southwestern Travis County. Nobody had ever looked at how much pumping was going on. And what we were really amazed to find was that most of the pumping in southwestern Travis County is from the lower Trinity. And that's the complete opposite of Hays County, just 10 miles to the south, where 90% of the water is pumped from the middle Trinity. So it's a very different system, and that's certainly reflected in the total number of wells. About a third of the wells are drilled in the middle Trinity as opposed to the lower Trinity in southwestern Travis County. And again, in Hays County, it's almost exclusively middle Trinity. So this just reflects the total pumping estimates we have for both Hays County, which you can see is about 3 times what it is for southwestern Travis County for the middle Trinity aquifer system. So that was very surprising to us. We really did not expect that at all. And when we look at the distribution of pumping, again, these are maps out of the Atlas. Here's you can see Lake Travis here. That red line represents that Bee Creek Fault I was telling you about that's restricting flow in this system here. You can see there's not many middle Trinity wells in this vicinity. Okay, and that's sort of a self-limiting thing because essentially, as I'll show you, the water levels are very depressed, and in some parts it's been dewatered. So there's just not groundwater for the middle Trinity in this area. Now there is some along the east side, but most of the production is out west here, where these rocks are exposed at the surface and there's recharge occurring. If we look at the lower Trinity, you can see there's certainly a lot of production out west, but there is still also a lot of irrigation production that's occurring here in this vicinity. Again, the lower Trinity is deeper, and although depleted, it's not being dewatered as of yet. So there's still some availability in that section. So if we look at wells from southwestern Travis County, we can see that this is a hydrograph showing the elevation of water level in wells since 1950 to present. So it's for this area, this is a pretty extensive and period of record. You can see that there is a consistent trend uniformly throughout this area, and it works out to be about 2 to 3 feet per year. So in other words, it's a consistent decline. So what we're seeing is a depletion of the water levels over time. Yes, there's some short gains and ups and downs, but if you look at the long-term trend, what we're seeing here is a resource being depleted, or in other words, another way to say that is being mined. So the groundwater in this area is being mined. Now, it doesn't happen everywhere. Now, these last wells were from between those faults that I was showing you that is very restricted. On that west side of southwestern Travis County, west of that Bee Creek Fault, there tends to be a lot more surface and groundwater interaction. There's more recharge. So this black line is the monthly average of Lake Travis. The blue line with the white circles shows a lower Trinity well, and you can see they correlate really well. In particular, if you look in 2011, the lake level bottoms out, and so does the aquifer, but it recovers just as quickly. So they're in direct communication. Now, if we look at water levels and water quality, this is that very same well I just showed you that was communicating with Lake Travis. You can see the red line, the black lines are the water level in the well. The black is total dissolved solids, so how salty the water is. And all these values are fresh water values. So this water is fresh. You move to the east across those faults, again in that restricted area, and you can see that as water levels decline over time, the water quality goes from pretty brackish to very brackish, so almost doubling over that period of time. So indicating that at least locally, it looks like with this mining, the water quality is also being impaired. So what do the water levels look like if you were to map them out? And that tells us, which direction of groundwater flow is headed. And when in 2018 and 19, we made a water level map. That's what these orange contours are for the lower Trinity. And the thing to point out here is that the flow is from sort of southwest to east northeast or northeast. So basically up towards you guys. The water is flowing in your direction in the lower Trinity. When we compare those water levels to 1978 water levels that were mapped, we can see there's been a consistent decline, just like those hydrographs have shown, of about 200 feet locally. And that's pretty regionally consistent. And these black dots are those hydrographs that I was showing you. There's an apparent recovery here, but that's really an anomalous data point that was mapped in 1978. And in fact, the hydrograph from that point shows a decline of over 100 feet over the last 40 years. So again, consistent with that story of the groundwater is being mined, is being depleted. So we look at the middle Trinity now. That was the deeper lower Trinity aquifer. The middle Trinity, again, in Hayes County, so the southern area, this is the primary aquifer. We know that in southwestern Travis County, it's not really the primary aquifer because it's being depleted. These water levels look very much the same as the lower Trinity in terms of direction. The flow is off to the east-northeast, again, towards the big drawdowns that we're seeing in that mapped overall Trinity trend when I began the talk. And similarly, when we compare it to 1978 data, so about 40 years ago, we see regions of drawdown of greater than 150 feet. If you look right along the river, there's some indication there's some influence of the Colorado River, which you might expect. Some of that is probably real, and some of that is also probably an artifact of the well completion of a few of those wells. They're essentially open to everything at the surface all the way down, so you tend to have elevated water levels. But what is true, whether or not there's a lot of interaction here, is that interaction is not extending very far north or south. So the river is not really a major feature within the aquifer system. Conversely, for the Middle Trinity, you look into Hays County, and basically we see localized declining levels, but in some places we don't see much of any decline. So where wells are unconfined, they're pretty consistent. The levels, it'd be hard to find a trend. And some of the deeper confined Middle Trinity systems, equally hard to place a trend on that. Whereas others, you do see a decline up to about 5 feet per year. So it's a little more hit and miss. But what you do see in Hays County is the impacts to spring flow. So this is Jacob's Well Spring on the right. It's a karstic spring, much like Edwards Springs, just Barton Springs or Kamala Springs or some of these others, very karstic. There's several miles of cave conduit passage that have been mapped here. And this spring flowed through the drought of record, during the 1950s drought of record. However, more recently, during moderate to severe droughts, the spring stopped flowing. And so this is, again, illustrating that concept of capture. So whereas in southwestern Travis County, you pump water, the source of water is coming from declines in storage, that is, water levels are declining, and they're consistently declining, so we know it's being mined, not being replenished. Whereas here, we see the effects more profoundly on the spring flow. And yet we can get a big rainfall and things can rebound and recover. So everything I've been talking about, we try to bundle it up and put into a conceptual model of how this aquifer system works. And so what you're looking at is a cartoon through southwestern Travis County, simplified to show the lower Trinity in orange and the middle Trinity there in green. Area out west of this Bee Creek Fault, we get lots of recharge. We don't see huge trends in declining water levels. We see the water this is the recharge zone area, so the water's fresher, there's a lot more surface groundwater interaction. However, in the middle here, between these two faults, we see both the middle and lower Trinity as being depleted. The water is being mined, and locally, the middle Trinity is dry. We see probably some influence of the river, but it's not a profound influence. So these are two very profound conclusions from that work. If we just shift to the south, down in Hays County, the same orange colors, the lower Trinity and the green here, you can see most of the green is saturated. So we're not dealing with an unsaturated middle Trinity. And most of the production is from the middle Trinity. We see a recharge happening coming out of springs. The faults here don't appear to be the barriers to flow like we see in southwestern Travis County. So two very different systems, even though they're just 10 miles apart. So the way that I would just summarize that is in Hays County, we see high yielding, fresh, fractured, karstic, renewable aquifer system. So it's very much like the Edwards system and maybe even the Edwards up in Bell County as well. And we see spring flow, so most of the effects we see from pumping and drought are decrease the capture of spring flow, so decrease natural discharge. Conversely, we just step into southwestern Travis County, and again, this was all really new to us and eye-opening. We see the wells there are fairly low yielding. They can be brackish. It's a very compartmentalized and depleted aquifer system. And most of the water there is coming from storage, that is, water level declines. And so this is the very same aquifer system that are adjacent to each other. And so I'll just move into the so what. And so hopefully we now have a better understanding of how the system works. And so we can integrate that into computer models. And so we can plan and utilize this information to looking forward. So that's kind of one of the implications, I think, of this work. More locally, the information that the new district, the Southwestern Travis County Conservation District, they're generating, they just submitted their management plan and they're in the process of developing rules, but at least they know what they're dealing with here. They're dealing with a resource here that is the source of water is predominantly from storage. They're dealing with a depleted resource. And so they really have to think of how they can manage that going forward as a managed depletion. So this is not unlike what's being done that most people are familiar with in the Ogallala. So, you know, their DFC is some sort of managed depletion type scenario. So that's important for them as they draft these rules. Conversely, to the south, in the Hayes Trinity District, they're dealing with, yes, there's some storage issues or water level drawdown, but fundamental there is the concept of preserving spring flow, and that is capture. So their concepts of sustainable yield are likely in the forefront of their discussions as they develop policies. You know, and this is not unlike in the Barton Springs District. We have sustainable yield policies for preserving spring flow. You know, and so the Hayes Trinity District has just delineated a spring shed for Jacob's Well, that spring I had showed you a picture of, as well as another spring called Pleasant Valley Spring. So understanding these two systems really does help in how you think about approaches to manage them. And so I just put down a couple thoughts about solutions and strategies. You know, so from the management perspective, you know, production limits are probably in there, and you can, again, if you're trying to protect spring flow, it's probably sustainable yield type rules or concepts and discussions versus a managed depletion type scenario. Certainly drought and conservation policies, education, but innovative water supply. So aquifer storage and recovery. You know, in southwestern Travis County, they have this massive reservoir system sitting exactly above a depleted aquifer system. So it seems to me that may be worth exploring. Is there some opportunity there? As opposed to in Hayes County, you know, maybe it's some sort of conjunctive interruptible supply that they could help preserve spring flow there. So understanding how the system works, I think this is a good example of, you know, how we can help inform policy. And there's a lot of work to be done. I think these atlases have provided the foundation, but we still need to understand the relationship of the Highland Lakes to the aquifers. We need to understand, I think, the faulting a bit better, and also what is that connection to the northern Trinity, you know, in Bell County and up around Waco. Is all the groundwater flowing in that direction because of just historical pumping? And so, as opposed to local effects of pumping, you know, so which is the smoking gun, if you will, and hopefully too that all these will result in revised numerical models. And so with that, I think I blew through this really quick, but I just want to acknowledge lots of folks and partners, particularly at Travis County and Hayes County. They really underwrote a lot of some of the detailed work here. There's numerous partners, but also just end up emphasizing, in my experience, in my opinion, is a lot of our understanding has come from understanding the rocks. And so I've got a lot of geologists here to acknowledge that are kind of the rock stars, the Al Brown, Eddie Collins, Chalk Woodruff, they're from the Bureau, Charlie Cairns at the Bureau, Pete Rose, my colleague Brian Smith, Doug Worman, Marcus Gary. So lots of folks came together to I think, tell this story. And so I think with that, I could take some questions.
Brian, this is Dirk. I can tell you, I really appreciate on behalf of the board, and they may have a couple of questions of you here in a second, but I wanted to ask you, just because this is really significant and it's new findings and new understandings, and we've been working with everybody from WSP to Alan Stanton and his team and LRE looking at this increased pumping in northern and Travis and Williamson, but also trying to get a handle. And there's some, I know Vince Claus and Alan are going to make some presentations on our 3D model and some new discernment they have that might even tie to and begin to connect the dots. So what's the next step? And are you looking at finding partners to do the exact same thing all the way through Travis and Williamson County? And if so, how's that going to look? And are you willing to take the lead on that? And you just need somebody to show you the money? What needs to happen?
Well, I think you sort of touched on it. I mean, and I know, and I'm peripherally aware of all the great work that y'all are helping from the north kind of to the south, and we're looking at connecting the dots, as you say, more to the northeast. And I think it starts with the rocks and the geology and understanding the structure and the stratigraphy really well. And I think y'all have a really good handle on that and are working south. And I think what needs to be done is we need to sort of fill in those gaps. There's no groundwater district in northern Travis or Williamson County, and so it's going to be up to the people surrounding it, I think, to gather that information and put it in context. And then I think we can start connecting the dots. It is intriguing, the trends I'm seeing are heading off in your direction, and I wish we had more data. So our data kind of ends not too far north of the Colorado River, just because that was kind of the extent of our study. So personally, I think what would be great is if the counties themselves, like Travis County, stepped up to really underwrite, this focused look at the hydrogeology. If Travis would do the same for the northern part as well as Williamson, and I think that would not only behoove them and their constituents and their county folks, but everybody around. So I would see that focusing on some of that. Again, maybe y'all have done some of that already, but focusing on the geology and getting the data and monitor wells in place, and those are kind of the next steps I would see. And I mean, my district, you also asked of, would we be willing? I think we, like everybody, have pretty limited resources, and a lot of what we're doing, our attention is now sort of pivoting a little more to the southwest in Hays County. We've got some controversial projects there, that water marketers and things like that. So we'll probably be focusing a lot of our energies in more in that direction, in some modeling. But I certainly hope others, whether it's through Baylor or you all at Clearwater, can help connect these dots, or maybe this fledgling district. The problem is the district just really doesn't have any revenue. I'm a director, by the way, on that new district, and I can tell you that they have no money. So
yeah, we so the next question I have is there influential stakeholders who have now seen this data? I know I've seen it a couple of times in different venues, but people that need to see it, such as those that championed the creation of the district. One of those was our own Senator Buckingham here, and she's championed the need for groundwater management from the Williamson County and northern Travis as well. And then in addition to that, has people in TCEQ and TWDB seen in the board seen this as well?
Yes. So it's a great question, great observation about some of the Buckingham and some of the senators and representatives. I think they should be aware. I don't think they are. I know that I haven't presented it to them. So I've presented this to the Water Development Board, and so they're very interested, and we've presented to county commissioners. In fact, next week I'm sort of meeting with one of the Travis County commissioners again. And so I don't know that we've hit everybody we should. I think there's a compelling story here. And the thing about the Atlas is it's really data driven. There's not really a whole lot of interpretation. So at the end of my talk, that's kind of me arm waving about what the implications are. But I think the value is it's a data driven document. And so I think the counties can be easily convinced and see the value in having that type of work done. And yeah, it really opened our eyes to southwestern Travis County. I was frankly shocked, and looking north, I probably shouldn't have been, but frankly, we were so focused on our corner down there and what we see in GMA 9, that is the Hill Country Trinity. We just haven't recognized anything like this before, and so this was really eye-opening. And
so, Leland, does any of you guys have questions of Brian?
Brian Leland here. My biggest takeaway here, it looks like your fault lines are playing a larger part in that and how the aquifer works down there than it is up here where we are.
But let me add to that, though, to help you out, Brian, because Leland hasn't seen next month's presentation of new discernment that does identify specific fault lines and confined areas, or that's a bad word, but Alan and Vince Claus are jumping out of their seat now, Leland, because they are going to show you some really new data that really begins to give us similar discernment of why we have declines in some areas and not in others.
Okay. Yeah, and if I could add a little bit here, you know, it is really tempting to look at these faults and say that is the primary cause, and I am sort of championing that story in part, but it's more complicated than that, in the sense that it's really about the rocks as well. And so we see a fundamental change in the permeability and porosity structure, and that means the rocks themselves, but it also means the faulting and the fracturing. And so it's all that together have sort of conspired to create the situation, I think, that southwestern Travis County is in. So I wouldn't necessarily, it's just the faults, it's that and the rocks themselves. And I'll add about faulting, what's so tricky about it is that, for example, that the Mount Bonnell fault, which is that big eastern one that runs through Austin, and you know, so in southwestern Travis County, the data that we have suggest it really is a barrier to flow across, right? It's really restricting. But as you head into south, if you head to the southwest into Hays County, that fault becomes what we call splayed. It becomes less significant, and instead of one big fault, it's a bunch of little ones. And so the effect there is that it doesn't seem to influence the groundwater as much. And so you can have a fault zone where it's definitely impeding flow, and then you can have a fault zone where it's not impeding, and in fact could be enhancing it. So it's, you know, a fault doesn't necessarily behave one way or the other, and that's what makes it really tricky and you know, and kind of fun too. When you have to go out there and collect different kinds of data so you can try and characterize what you think is going on. So.
Nobody else? Okay, Brian, thank you a bunch.
Yeah, thank y'all.
Okay, let's go ahead and go to number 2, receive information concerning the Bell County Adaptive Management Coalition study of the Edwards BFZ Springshed by Baylor University Geoscience Department. So, Dr. Joe, I don't know if that's you or who's going to present that. No, either.
Dr. Joe is sitting in the lobby, but he has a young lady that I'm going to let her introduce herself. And you've heard her name multiple times, and I think we've met her. But I have made you, Clara, the presenter. There you are.
Got it.
Dr. Joe, we've got him muted intentionally. So you're on your own, Clara.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Clara Smith Salgado, and I'm one of Dr. Joe Yelderman's master's students. And so this presentation will go over my thesis project that I'm doing in Salado, Texas.
And Clara, can I explain one thing to the board, just kind of connect the dots for them? Gentlemen, this is one of the 3 projects that are funded through the coalition that we participate. So the funding partners for her and her project through Baylor are the Village of Salado, Bell County, Clearwater, and Salado Water Supply Corporation. So, and Clara's project is funded funded fully in the first year to Baylor, and then it's a 2-year project though with their deliverables defined at different times. And so it won't happen in one fiscal year, but we're glad that you are key to this. And just to honestly, Clara, I saw your presentation to your committee before their acceptance of this for your thesis, and I thought you did a great job. And so they understand who's paying for this and how, and what the means to us in the end. I think it'll speak volumes. Thank you, Claire.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Okay. So my thesis research is titled The Springshed and Potential Recharge Areas for the Downtown Salado Spring Complex. And this is a spring complex located in Salado within the northern segment of the Edwards Balcones Fault Zone Aquifer. Okay, so to start, here's an outline for this presentation. I'll start by giving an introduction and listing the objectives for this project. Then I will provide some background information on the study area. Then I will go through the various methods we'll be using. Then I'll provide the anticipated results for this research. And then at the end, I'll briefly go over the project timeline for the next year. Okay. So as an introduction, Salado, Texas and Bell County are currently experiencing rapid population growth and development, which will lead to increased demand for groundwater. Also, the Salado Spring Complex that I'll be studying provides habitat for this threatened Salado salamander. And with that, the Springshed information from this thesis study will provide guidance for habitat and groundwater management in Bell County. Okay. So the goals of this project are to refine the Springshed boundary of the Salado Spring Complex in Bell County and to identify key recharge areas within the Springshed. So overall, the results of this project will assist in groundwater resource management to maintain a sustainable groundwater supply for the Edwards Aquifer in Bell County. And it will also help to protect threatened species at the springs by understanding the factors that maintain spring flow. Okay, so then what is a springshed? A springshed is an area where groundwater will flow to a spring discharge point, and this is analogous to a watershed where all the precipitation and runoff in a certain area will collect and drain into a common outlet. And now for the study area. The Salado Spring Complex is located within the outcrop portion of the northern segment of the Edwards Balcones Fault Zone Aquifer. And this segment has received less attention than the Barton Springs and San Antonio segment, and mainly because of the dependence on groundwater in large municipalities in those areas, such as in San Antonio. But with the rapid population growth within the northern segment, this will lead to a higher demand for groundwater from the Edwards Aquifer. And so that's why it's important to study this area to gain a better understanding of the hydrology of this segment to then appropriately manage this water resource. And then this is a map of the spring complex where most of my work will be focused. And it is found along Salado Creek. And this map highlights the 8 different springs that have been identified at this site from previous studies. And they're all a part of an integrated fracture system. And they are the discharge point for the Salado Springshed. And then I included this cross-section in the slides to provide an understanding for the stratigraphic and hydrostratigraphic units in the study area. And the northern segment of the Edwards Aquifer is a confined and unconfined karst aquifer, and that's highlighted here in blue. And because the Edwards is a karst aquifer and it's located along the Balcones Fault Zone, it has varying degrees of conduits and fractures, which then contribute to heterogeneity within the spring complex and the creek basin. Okay, so now on to the methods I plan to use for this project. The first method involves the use of synoptic water level maps, which were used to hypothesize a springshed boundary. So for that, I used water level measurements that were collected in Bell County by the Clearwater District, assisted by Randy Williams in 2010, and then by Baylor in 2013 and 2019. And so I used the water level points to contour the potentiometric surface for each year. And from these surfaces, I estimated a springshed boundary for the springs for each year. And these are shown by the blue, green, and red lines. And it should be noted that in each year, there were slightly different aquifer conditions, different wells were sampled, and also groundwater use has been increasing over time, and that's why the boundaries may vary slightly in each year. So then, as a result, each data set produced consistent Springshed estimates, which I have overlapped each one onto this map of the 2019 synoptic map. And so within the Springshed, the dominant flow direction is east-southeast and then deflects northeast towards Salado Springs. And so then with this map, this serves as our starting point for hypothesizing an appropriate Springshed boundary for the study area, and we will be refining it further over the course of this project. Okay, the next method, since synoptic maps represent homogeneous aquifer conditions, the direct and regional flow paths within and outside of the spring complex will be analyzed through field observations to determine noticeable recharge areas to improve Springshed delineation. And so this will be done through geologic and soils mapping, and I will also conduct karst surveys to identify key karst features in the area. And then the next method I will use is a rainfall and spring flow analysis. And the main objective for this method is to understand if there are areas within the Springshed where rainfall causes a greater response to spring flow than in other areas. And so this analysis can be understood through a statistical correlation between rainfall and spring flow within the basin. And we are working with Dr. Jane Harville from the stats department at Baylor University to do this analysis. And so spring flow data will come from the base flow separation discharge at the Salado Spring Complex using creek discharge data from the USGS. And then rainfall data will be obtained from the 88D radar. And to understand rainfall in the basin, the figure I included shows that two different rain events in 2017 were similar in magnitude within the basin, but it turns out that the April event produced a larger increase in groundwater levels, and this is because of where the rainfall was concentrated within the basin. And so this study in 2017 highlights that different rainfall events produce varying degrees of aquifer recharge at different locations, and so that can have an effect to the amount of discharge at the springs. And so because of that, I want to analyze quantitatively the spring flow response to different rainfall events within and outside the Springshed through a statistical correlation analysis. Okay. And then another method will include an isotopic composition analysis to understand the relationship between meteoric water and the groundwater discharging at the springs. And so for this analysis, water samples will be collected at the springs to determine their oxygen, deuterium, and carbon isotopic composition during normal and dry aquifer conditions, as well as during specific rain events. And the oxygen and deuterium values will be compared to the local meteoric waterline to understand how recharge events may affect discharge at the springs. So depending on the type of rain event or lack of, then the isotopic composition of the discharging water at the springs could fluctuate. And then carbon values will determine the apparent age of the discharging water during normal and dry conditions. So if the discharging water is sourced from a recent rain event or from older water stored in the aquifer. And we actually collected our first round of isotope samples a couple weeks back. And these would represent the normal aquifer conditions. And samples were collected at Robertson Springs, Big Boiling, and at three wells within the basin. And so now we're just waiting for the results from the lab. Okay. And lastly, we are planning a ditrace study And this study will possibly be done in the fall if permission can be granted through landowners. And previous dye trace tests were conducted locally within the Salado Spring Complex in 2013 and 2015. But with this project, we will be testing groundwater flow paths throughout a larger portion of the Springshed. And we have 2 potential injection sites that we have discussed with the district. So the final sites will be determined after further planning. Okay. So for the anticipated results, with this project, we would have refined the Springshed boundary, identified potential significant recharge areas needing further groundwater protection or investigation. We would have generated data that can be used for future studies and developed a better understanding of how the groundwater flow system works in Bell County. Okay. And here's a timetable for the next year. And basically, we plan on doing most of the field work this summer and into early fall. And then I'll be writing my thesis on this work in the fall semester, and then hopefully defending this project in March or April in the following year. And then here are the references. And that's it. Thank you for listening.
So, Leland, those of us that are emotionally tied to the work that Stephanie and Dr. Joe led for us from 2013 on, this is just that next step. That it was also a vision of former County Commissioner Tim Brown, and Clara will do whatever we can to get those permissions in place. Mm-hmm. And some additional equipment that you need. Understand you're going to need a water truck, possibly, and I think we have that. But for the board and all of our guests, Clara's work is just another chapter in multiple events that are studies we've had with Baylor. But Clara, I just want you to know there's some people I invited to listen today to hear and see the framework of your study, and those are our consultants representing the coalition. I see David Jones is on, and Maddie Todd, and Katie, I think she was on earlier, I'm not sure, but they may be reaching out to you, and they've already been meeting with Dr. Joe and Stephanie. So these are things that are very impactful for the coalition as we navigate with the leadership of our consultants. They'll be negotiating a 4D rule, special 4D rule that includes a lot more discernment of the science. And I just can't tell you how timely this is for those of us in the groundwater world. Mm-hmm. Do you guys have any questions, board? And being that it's in workshop, maybe others on the call might have a question as well.
I'm just glad to see. I'm advocating since I've been on the board to try to get more thesis done by either any of the colleges, A&M, UT, and Baylor. And we never could get the other universities to jump in on it. Baylor, with Dr. Joe's help, has really taken them on and run with it. So I'm very happy that we're getting some of the colleges involved in this stuff. Glad to see it. Mm-hmm.
And I see there's a gentleman from Barton Springs is auditing this presentation today. Clara, who might that be? I'm teasing.
Yeah.
Well, her father is Brian Hunt, who's one of the team's members, works at Barton Springs, and he's of the previous presentation. He's one of the key players there, and it's just neat to see his daughter. Yes,
Dirk,
go ahead.
This is Brian. You almost got it right.
Oh, I meant Brian Smith.
Brian Smith, who is my colleague and co-author. That's Brian. That's Clara's daughter. Her father.
Yeah, you're too young. Poor Clara. It's the third time I've done it, Clara, but I'm an old man. I can do those things.
I was just gonna say I'm not that old. You know, Brian Smith's that old.
No, you're too young to have. But I would say that you're in good hands with Dr. Joe as much as we teach him, and we feel a kindred spirit because of his willingness to get engaged in a very critical time and bring Stephanie along, and we wouldn't be where we are today in being able to defend ourselves on these the comment period coming in and the preparation of a 4D rule if it wasn't for Baylor. So.
Yeah, I'm excited to be working with y'all and to continue with all the work that's been done at Baylor so far.
And so the board knows Will Anderson you'll see his name on the list of those of you that look at the people that are here. Will is an intern here in our office. He started on Monday. He's leaving the military and he's going back to his home state. He is a geologist. He has a degree in geology and natural and environmental sciences and wants to go into the groundwater world back in California. So as a West Pointer and coming off of Fort Hood, he's a really great asset in support of your project this summer, and we're glad to have him as well. Leland?
Okay, thanks a bunch. We appreciate it. We're looking forward to seeing the results here. Okay, number 3, receive information related to fiscal year 20 funded studies concerning the DFC trend tools, status of the Trinity Aquifer, well spacing analysis of potential aquifer management areas. Dirk?
So I am going to make Mike Keester is who we're receiving those from.
Yes, sir.
Mike has 3 documents with you. I'm going to turn him on as a presenter. And the documents that he's referencing are in front of each of you on the board. But also those that are on the call would like copies of those. We'll have them posted tomorrow for them to look at and download those studies. Mike, glad to have you back, man.
Yes, sir. Let's get this thing going here. So let's see here. I'll make it so just in case I decide to wave my arms or something, I'll turn on my camera for you there. But so really looking to try to just give you a quick summary over three of the projects that we were working on, talk a little bit about them, aware of how much we've got on the agenda today. So I'll try to be quick, but please feel free to stop me anytime if you see something you want to ask a question about. We're going to be looking really at a DFC, the DFC status tool, just doing an update of that, looking at the 2020 Trinity Aquifer status update, and then also look at the well spacing evaluation, did an update of that as well. Let's start with the DFC status tool. This is a tool that's really was developed. It's been in development for quite a while. We're looking at it's a tool that was really designed with the idea from the very beginning was a way to take all the water level measurements that you're making, all the work that you're doing to understand to measure water levels and compare how do those correspond with the adopted DFCs, what we're measuring versus what we're modeling. And to give you a quick way to easily inform you of the aquifer status and visualize and communicate some of the data that you have there. So we talked about this actually back in December a little bit, looking just kind of at the history. And so we're just adding a little bit onto the history here. It started in 2014, really looking at, we took the Excel workbooks that the district was keeping water level data in and added some equations in there to try to get an estimate of measured water levels and what does that mean and how do we interpret that versus the modeled water levels on the adopted DFC. In 2015, that information was taken from and put into the HAF database so that You can see it on your web, on the web database there. 2016 began a revision of the tool, trying to look at other ways to, understand this data. And Brent Kenichi, he's with WSP now. He's took that information, used the R programming language to develop these web browser-based interactive tool, and put together the documentation, provided that tool to you back in 2018. Last December when we talked about it, just a little bit of debugging, some minor updates based on some feedback that you had provided. And one of the things that we did looking at it though is we were trying to reincorporate the spatial analysis component that Brent had developed into the tool. So that's really what we're looking at with these updates is we focused really on that spatial analysis part of it and trying to started with improving an estimation of the initial heads of where water level surfaces began that correlated with the adopted DFCs. So trying to better understand what was that water level on January 1 of 2010. We looked at the spatial analysis methods and tried to, based on there's such a small amount of data points in the upper Trinity that, and looking at the methods, it made more sense to go to an inverse distance weighted versus a kriging method, which is part of the initial tool. So that was really the only change there. Some other minor changes with the spatial analysis part that we talked about. We also added kind of some aesthetic features and some functionality by adding, making it easier to see the contours, so what the water levels were, and an ability to export those contour maps. So rather than giving you a live demo of the tool, we're just going to really quick go through some screenshots to summarize it, and then certainly we can do a live demo. Either I can work with Dirk on that, or if you guys want to see some specific aspects of it, we can take a look at that. But first thing that pops up when we start the tool are these summary tables. And what we're looking at here is when we were talking about the tool back in December, we were at that point where we had limited the functionality to this slope analysis. And so looking at there's really a well by well analysis of what water levels were doing, how they were trending, and what that difference meant. So now what we're looking at also is we've reincorporated some work that was done to develop a spatial analysis. So we've added in this table down here along with the menu items on the side here to address it. So these guys, you can see, make it so you can read them a little bit easier rather than that small print. We've got the upper Trinity, just like we have for the well analysis. We now have a spatial analysis, and the difference between the two is that with the well analysis, we are really looking at on a well by well basis how water levels are trending. On the spatial analysis, the tool tries to take those individual well by well water levels and interpolate a surface over the entire county as to, well, what is an estimate of the depth of the water at every location across Bow County where the aquifer is located. And what that gives us is a couple of different trends in how the water levels are changing over time. The well analysis, which we looked at before, we're able to look at the average of all of the different monitoring wells and what that trend is to get an estimate of what the average drawdown trend is based on each individual well. And then we can look over here and go, okay, well, what's that compared to the DFC? Negative is bad, positive is good. That's essentially what it works out to. Well, with the spatial analysis, like I said, we're interpolating from a few data points from where those monitoring wells are to every location across Bow County. With the upper Trinity, you can see that makes a pretty significant difference of about 2 feet in difference, a little more than that, between the well and the spatial analysis. Makes you go from being above the DFC to below as far as the trend. The middle Trinity goes the other way. Now we're okay compared to the trend. And for the lower Trinity, it just looks like we're doing a little better versus the trend. So both of these have, the well analysis, one of the issues that we have with it is it's only looking at where we're monitoring water levels. So it doesn't necessarily cover every location in the county. The spatial analysis, it does an interpolation. So there's still going to be some error down in other parts of the county where we don't have good monitoring data control. But let's say in general, they do give you an informed of generally where we are compared to the DFC. So if we want to look at, say, a particular example of the difference here with the spatial analysis, let's go ahead and look at that middle Trinity. And what we get in here is when we select it, we can see and this is where an average annual water level across the entire district and how many feet below ground level. These are the results for each year from 2010 through the most recent measurements, which in this case they're down here pretty low because we're looking in the middle of June, middle of summer, they're a little bit lower. Well, we fit a best fit trend through those data points, and we get an estimate of how water levels on the county as a whole have declined over time. And this trend would suggest that we're going to intersect out here right at about 2070. Excuse me. When we look at it a little bit further down in the map, we can see, well, this is what that water level surface looks like in that depth of water. As we know from some of our other analyses, we know that, yeah, we do definitely have deeper water levels over here. Water levels have declined more in the past. Water levels are not quite as deep, but there's also limited by the structure of the aquifer over here in the western part of the county. Over here, we don't have water levels that have declined quite as much. We do have one monitoring well here, but we have a big blank area where, the middle Trinity is essentially unused. So we really don't have good control over the depth of water in these areas. So this is where you go, well, this is where we're a little more uncertain in what those results could be. But this is where we also added a little bit of functionality. So if we wanted to change what year we were looking at, we can change it here. And then actually download a copy of this map for use within any particular communication items or something. So that's just a kind of a real quick brief update on the tool itself and some of the updates that were done. Like I said, I just did a few screenshots here, understanding the time limitations, but if you'd like to look a little bit more, have any questions, we can talk about that real quick.
Go ahead.
Nope. All right, continue on with the next one. So let's take a quick look at the update to the Trinity Aquifer status. This is, once again, like a project we've been looking at quite a bit over the last few years, continually trying to update our understanding of how water levels have been changing within the Trinity Aquifer. Methodology has remained consistent over the last several years. We're looking at wells specifically that we can identify that are completed in either the middle or lower Trinity aquifers. We're looking to collect end of year or at least near the end of the year water level measurements. Groundwater data, the Clearwater's database is our primary source for water level data. But as we extend and look outside further and further out from the county boundaries, that's when we start looking to the Texas Water Development Board's groundwater database. That's where we tend to get water levels that are collected in the later October, whereas the Clearwater's database does tend to have some measurements there in December, so very near the end of the year measurements there. And then our last source of information being the submitted drillers reports, where we look to identify, take the data that those reports provide on the completion of the well and look at it, look at which aquifer it's completed in, and then from there go to understand when the well was completed and if it has a water level measurement associated with it. So from those, we're able to help fill in some gaps in areas where there may not be other monitoring data. Using those data points, we developed a map of the water level surface and then look to compare those to some previous analyses. Now this year, one of the things that Dirk asked me to do was try to look at a larger area. So we tried to extend mapping of the water levels down into Travis County, through Williamson County, down into Travis County, and try to understand, what the water levels were over a larger area. So we were able to do that. We were able to find enough information to expand that, or actually looking at the Hydrogeologic Atlas that Brian Hunt was showing a little bit earlier there. We did see that those water levels our results match up pretty well, so we'll talk about that. One thing we weren't able to expand upon at this time was how the drawdown had increased, and that was, we weren't able to get enough data points, or we didn't feel like we had enough yet from the 2006, going back into the 2006 water levels, which is what we've been using as our baseline year, to really expand our understanding of the water levels down during that year in those areas. So still going to work on that a little bit, try to expand it, but just weren't able to for this particular analysis. So if we look at the middle Trinity drawdown, you'll see this is what I was talking about with the extents, similar to what you've seen in the past. We do have those. We're still working on 2006 as the baseline year. We have about 130 feet of decline in the Hidden Springs area since 2006. Now, if you'll recall from last year's analyses, which I don't blame you if you don't have that off the top of your head, but those numbers were actually closer to 150 feet. And that was actually due to when we did the analysis on the 2018 water levels. We did a little bit earlier, and we see that the water levels did recover a little bit between just a couple of months difference in when the water levels that we used for those two analyses. So, we're still seeing about 100 feet or more of decline near Florence, and about 180 feet or so in the Sun City area to the south. Looking in that Hidden Springs area, I know you've seen this chart before. Really trying to, what we saw is that when we did that first analysis was right here in that 2014 time frame, and water levels were just continually declining during that period, from 2006 up through about 2014. When we had done that, we did that analysis, and from that time we started to see water levels generally start to recover a little bit. But since 2017, we've started to see the decline start to occur again within that area. So we're seeing that trend. It's not quite as steep at this point as the 2006 to 2014, but it is starting to go in that direction again. And the recovery that I mentioned to you, that actually occurred. We did that analysis last year for the 2018 water levels, right around in this time frame. And that's why we were using a water level that was a little bit deeper, and you can see how much it recovered just in a relatively short, about from October to January. So it recovered over more than 20 feet, about 30 feet during that time period.
Hey, Mike, can I add one thing here? Now that we have this report, and Dr. Joe with Will Brewer is doing a more site-specific with 5 wells in Hidden Springs, so the board knows, what I'll do is I'll go back into Hidden Springs and look at the number of production wells actually drilled, completed, and being used. They're all exempt wells on small tracts that got grandfathered in because they were less than 10 acres, so they're not permitted. But the build out has accelerated in the last 2 years, where people are building large homes. We've met with the Hidden Springs. Gary lined that up from 2014 to 17, but we have we have additional wells being built out in Hidden Springs as new homes are being built. And we're finding that those are people not accustomed to living in the country. They're high-end $750,000 to $1 million homes, and so now the trend is trending down again, and we're trying to work through that. But once we get the data, your data and Will's, we'll be working with the HOA to address this again. Gary may have something he wants to add to it at the end, being one of our directors that lives there.
Very good. So with that, we can see that the declines are occurring there. But one of the things that we always tend to take a look at is the available drawdown. And this just being the water level above the top of the aquifer is what we're referring to. And we see that in that Hidden Springs area, so we're still more than 400 feet above the top of the aquifer. But just to let you know, when I did compare it to the previous maps, we do see that this particular contour line, this 400-foot contour line, it moved over from approximately right here and then moved westward. So really that's just an indication that that available drawdown is declining over time in that area. We're also seeing, we're down to less than 40 feet in the Stillman Valley area and less than 100 feet down here in the Florence area. And overall, it just, except for over here in the where the aquifer is essentially unused, it is just generally decreasing as we're looking forward. And we can see that in some of those wells in the western part of the district. So looking at some of these wells over here, we can see, this is building upon a chart that I've shown you a few times each year, how the 26, our estimate of the 26 water level, how much it's declined here through 2019. So we can see, for example, at the River Ridge Ranch well, it's declined from about 550 to 450 feet. And this is an elevation, just so that we could see these on one graph. Scott, your well, this is an estimate in 2006. I know your well didn't exist then, but if we look at the 2010 data, we can see that it's gone from about 475 down to 300 feet. So it's dropped about over 150 feet there.
Yeah, I can attest to that.
I thought you could. This Bassey well, this is a monitoring well for from the Water Development Board down here in northern Williamson County. And we can see also the similar declines occurring over at that particular well. It did not exist in 2006, so this is an estimated level up here. But we can see it here in 2019, where it's getting much closer to the top of the aquifer there. That's really the differences that we're trying to illustrate here on this map, is just how much closer it's getting to the top of the aquifer in several of these locations. So looking now at the lower Trinity water level surface, one of the things that happened when we expanded how big of an area we were looking at is our understanding of what the water level surface looked like. It really changed quite a bit from in 2018. So the last year when we did the work, we didn't look quite as far south to help inform how these contour lines should look. And based on some data that we had, it looked like general cone of depression up here towards Waco, which was reasonable, and that water was generally flowing in that direction. We did have a well here with a water level measurement. It was about 500 to 520 feet in elevation. On that same well, we're now looking at about 420 feet of elevation for the water level. But we did have some additional information. We incorporated several submitted drillers reports down here in the southwestern part of Williamson County. And that helped us understand where water levels were doing in there, as well as the Taylor well that had a measurement this year. And so we were able to better understand what the water levels were there. And we basically found that there's something going on with the water levels. There's a kind of a cone of depression in this direction, or it appears to be, as well as one up here in the Waco area. So the water levels, there's almost a ridge, a bit of a ridge or a divide. I will caveat that with the statement that there's no measurements anywhere in this big blank area here. So we are trying to develop an understanding of the water levels in that area, but it is kind of just some missing data. But with the change that we saw there in our understanding of the water level surface, we also see a bit of a change in our understanding of the drawdown in the area. So we do still see quite a bit of drawdown occurring over in southeastern portion of Bow counties, right there around Bartlett, remember right? Yeah. We're still seeing about 100 feet of decline going in the northern direction here towards Waco. So still seeing that water level decline in that area, but it's possible that we're seeing essentially not much change from those 2006 values, or a little bit of recovery since last year, from with the data that we have since 2006, that those water levels may actually be starting to come back up in that lower Trinity in that area, just because of one thing. For one, it's not just not being used as much, but used really by Florence now. So, but within Bell County, we do still have a good understanding of what water levels are doing, how they're declining due to the monitoring well network. We're looking at, if I recall, this is one of the Moffett wells up here by Lake Belton, or Belton Lake. We're seeing just this long-term decline. And it's gone from about a little under 400 feet there in 2003, 2002, down to about 500 feet. So a little less than 100 feet of decline over the last 18, 19 years or so. As far as the available drawdown goes, we are looking at, we have much more available drawdown in the lower Trinity. And it's a deeper aquifer. It makes sense. There's more water level. Water levels are further above the top of the aquifer, and the aquifer isn't being used quite as much. So we're seeing more than 200 feet of available drawdown up here in the Stoneman Valley area, around Florence. And really, this means that, you know, the lower Trinity does have a greater potential for long-term use, and currently it does have a much lower rate of water level decline. So some conclusions from the study are that, you know, really it illustrates the importance of monitoring to understand the trend in the water levels and to be able to communicate the conditions of the aquifer itself. The middle Trinity, it's looking at those long-term declines. We're seeing in some areas of up to about 10 feet per year. Generally, that available drawdown is decreasing. And with the lower Trinity, it is a deeper aquifer, has much more available drawdown generally than the middle Trinity. There are, in south of Bell County, though, it's difficult to understand what water levels are doing. There's just not much monitoring going on down there. So, without any questions on the Trinity aquifer status?
Mike, I have a question for you, Gary Young. In your presentation there on Hidden Springs, you showed a graph of, 130 feet decline. That one there, can I get a copy of that? I sit on the ACC committee, and I'm pushing real hard because we don't have any guidelines to come in and tell a homeowner what kind of sprinkling system they can put in their yards. And I drove through the subdivision last night. It's amazing how many more people are adding very expensive, exclusive sprinkling systems and bringing in, some really nice grass, which their front yards and everything look like golf courses.
Yeah.
If we can get the ACC and the board together to do that, maybe we can come up with some guidelines that we can use out there. I'd like to get a copy of that, a particular graph, if I can.
Certainly, yeah. I can send you one, or I know Dirk's got a copy of the presentation. He can get you one before you leave.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, Gary, that entire packet, I think, is in those three documents that are from LRE right there. And we can make larger maps for you should you have a meeting, and be glad to attend with you as well.
Yeah, those graphs are not in there.
Yeah, I looked for it. I looked for it. I did not see that particular graph that I was looking for. So that's one I was asking.
Yeah, you are correct. I didn't get the graph into the actual technical memo. I thought about it after the fact, unfortunately. Or I remembered that I usually have that in there, and I had forgotten to include that in the memo. But
thank you, Mike.
I can always revise the memo also to get it in there.
That would be good.
All right. Any other questions before we move to the next one? All right. So last one we're going to look at here is the district, the well spacing evaluation update. This was actually an update that first did back in 2015, or we're looking at the well spacing evaluation. As you're aware, the district rules they base spacing from other wells and from the property line based on the column size of the well. And there was some discussion back even when we did the first evaluation of, should the district continue with looking at column pipe? And the idea there being that column pipe, it's something that any well owner can essentially walk out and pretty easily see what size column pipe they have coming out of their well. So it made it easy to try to make it relatable. Now in that 2015 evaluation, this is another one that I worked with Brandt on there at WSB, and we looked at estimated the maximum pumping that could be associated with the column size. And this actually, when we did the evaluation, it did create a very large range of potential drawdowns, but in some cases it's kind of unrealistic. But from those recommendations, or from those results, we could see that there could be a need to update those spacing requirements in the rules. Well, with the improved understanding of the hydraulic properties of the lower Trinity, with all of the pumping tests that have been done, all the analysis that was done, that Dr. Joe did with his group there, looking at the Trinity Oasis pumping test, along with a lot of other work that was done, we revisited this evaluation this year. And part of this reevaluation also, we wanted to reconsider the limits on the pumping rates associated with the different column pipe, as well as the location within the county. So looking at the column pipe and the pumping rates associated with it, we looked at data from Grundfos, which is a pump manufacturer. Looking at their pumps and motors, we were able to determine for column diameters up to about 6 inches what a general flow rate was from some of those pumps and from a column pipe, and we were able to assign basically those instantaneous rates. When you turn the pump on, how much water is going to come through it. We were also then able to just kind of use some rule of thumb values with estimated velocities going through pipe to develop estimates of a pumping rate to associate with some of these larger column pipes as well. And then we correlated those to the classifications that are currently in the district rules. We're looking at up to 2 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches, 8 inches, 10 inches. And then the last classification is greater than 12, it states greater than 12 inches, but I believe that the way it's written, it really refers to anything more than 10 inches or so. It would be like the 10 to 12 inch range. So here we've just called it more than 10 inches within the analysis. And we came up with these different flow rates, looking at up to 45 gallons per minute from a 2-inch column pipe. Keeping in mind, of course, many of the domestic wells, they're probably going to have this 1.25-inch column pipe with about a 10 gallon per minute. So that's what would be more common to see out there. So you can see some different rates that we came up with. So we took those rates and we used the same approach as really was applied during the previous evaluation, using a TICE analytical model to calculate drawdown based on using these pumping rates and the hydraulic characteristics of the aquifer. One of the changes we did this time was to look at 1 day, 1 month, and 1 year, how much drawdown would occur under those different time frames under these with these pumping rates. And that was really just to keep it consistent with when we do an N1 permit application review. That's the way the tool was built that does the calculations of drawdown for those applications. One of the other changes we made was we did the calculations on a cell-by-cell basis within the district. So the district, when we look at the Northern Trinity Woodbine groundwater availability model, it has the county basically chopped up into quarter-mile grid cells, which results in a little over 17,000 model cells for the county. And the way we did it, the analysis this time was to really do the calculation at each one of those model cells and then see what those results were. We adjusted the long-term rates of pumping to be more representative of the possible production. What that means is that for the larger column sizes, we assumed a 30% service time. That when we were looking at, for example, a 1-year pumping rate, that we assumed it was only pumping for 30% of the time at its whatever assigned gallons per minute rate. And then for those smaller wells, for a 2-inch column and smaller, we just assumed that during the course of a day, it would only be operating about, for a total of about 1 hour per day. Looking at for the 30 days, and then for looking at a full year, we assumed 0.6 acre feet per year, which is pretty closer to the same amount we use on a lot of those domestic when reviewing the M1s or the domestic wells. So. For the transmissivity, that's another input that we need for this particular model. We use the Northern Trinity Woodbine GAM, those values for each one of the grid cells from the Middle Trinity Aquifer. For the Lower Trinity, however, we did use the draft of the modified GAM. WSP is currently working on that. I know Brant was working on developing that revised distribution value of transmissivity based on the new pumping test data and the new information that's been developed over the last few years. So we went and used that draft file or information for this analysis. And then for a storage coefficient, we just used the 10 to the -4 value, which is consistent with what Dr. Yelderman found was pretty representative from the Trinity Oasis, that long-term pumping test that was done there. We felt like, well, that's going to be a good number to use for this analysis as well. As I mentioned, we were also looking at a pumping limitation. The purpose of that was to really limit some of those unrealistic results, keep pumping from being so high that it caused water levels, for example, to more drawdown than could physically occur, dropping water levels below the bottom of the aquifer or something like that. So the way that we applied this limitation was we estimated the specific capacity at that location based on the transmissivity of the cell. We also estimated the available drawdown from those end of 2019 water levels, the same available drawdown maps that I showed you just a moment ago. Except that for any particular location, we did not set, we limited that available drawdown to 200 feet, so no more than 200 feet. But also, if water levels were below the top of the aquifer, we still allowed it to have 1 foot of available drawdown. So put that in there. And the purpose of that was to calculate a maximum rate that could occur within a cell, within a particular model cell. And that was just calculated as that specific capacity times the available drawdown. So if that particular maximum rate was less than the assigned rate, that was when we would use the assigned rate. Or if the maximum rate was less than the assigned rate, we'd use the maximum rate for the location. So that created a limitation based on those aquifer conditions and the aquifer hydraulic properties to keep our calculations of drawdown from being unrealistic values for this spacing analysis. So for the Middle Trinity, what we found is we really had to go down and look at even a smaller range than the 2 to 4 inch column pipe range. So we looked at a 2 to 3 inch column pipe range, which gave us about 150 gallons per minute and up to about 72.6 acre feet per year from a location. And what we find is that we see these distances over here of it being less than 100 feet to 50 feet of drawdown. And what that would mean is that anywhere between the well and 50 feet away from the well, and 100 feet away from the well, you would have more than 50 feet. More than 100 feet from the well, you'd have greater than 50 feet, or I mean less than 50 feet of drawdown. However, keep in mind that with the pumping limitations, one of the things that really drove the calculations over in this part part of the county for the Middle Trinity is that it could not reach this pumping rate. So it had very small pumping rates, and most of the locations in here are, because it didn't calculate any values less than 1 foot, these are just representative of very low production characteristics and very low available drawdown in the Middle Trinity. Showing that, you know, the spacing calculation essentially is showing that it's not going to be able to produce those amounts of water in that area. And we see a very similar trend with other maps that were developed looking at this. Because we have more available drawdown to the east of I-35, that's why these distances, it's saying, well, you would have about a 1/4 mile to get to this 50 feet of drawdown. Anywhere more than a 1/4 mile, you'd have less than 50 feet of drawdown. So the spacing calculations, when we started looking at the information, it really did suggest that a column pipe, a well using a column pipe more than 6 inches is highly unlikely in the Middle Trinity Aquifer. We also found that when we're looking at as a whole, anything greater than a 2-inch column pipe, because of the low production characteristics of the aquifer, you would really need to increase the spacing in order to try to limit the amount of drawdown or how much impact there could be from a new well. But for the smaller capacity wells, because the drawdown doesn't actually reach out very far very fast, we didn't see that there was any really need for a change in those spacing in the current spacing requirements of about 100 feet from a new well. Looking at the lower Trinity, we see something much different, however. So here, when we're looking at this particular map, we're looking at a well with a 6-inch to 8-inch column pipe to 1,000 gallon a minute well, pumping about 300 acre feet per year. And we see over here on the east side of I-35 to the north of Belton Lake, generally less than 100 feet. Now, I'll let you know that here for the east side of, pretty much to the east of I-35, it's because we have much higher production characteristics as well as large available drawdown. So it can produce at these rates, and that pumping, that drawdown doesn't extend out very far from the well. Just better production characteristics. Looking up here to the north area, we do have less available drawdown. So there's been more declines in that area, and so that's limited the pumping rates to smaller amounts up in this area. Going to the larger pumping, larger column size, 1,500 gallons a minute, about 500 acre feet per year. We do see that same trend over here, about 100 feet, pretty large area where less than 100 feet to that 50 feet of drawdown. And we can see pretty easily demarcate a line here that follows right where we had this 100 feet distance to 100 feet of drawdown line. Now we have about a 1/4 mile to the distance to 50 feet of drawdown. And we can see in this area, we're certainly seeing impacts that it really reaches out quite a ways in order to get to, that drawdown reaches out quite a ways. Similar for the 10-inch, for these really, potentially for really large wells. Here we can see it's going to reach out to, it's going to be, that distance to 50 feet of drawdown would be well more than a mile in most of Eastern Bell County, or I'm sorry, Western Bell County, whereas in Eastern Bell County, the production characteristics of the aquifer suggest that that drawdown just doesn't reach out very far. And this is really confirmed by the Trinity Oasis test, some of the other production wells that have gone in down in this area. So what this spacing information allows us to start to think about is, it gives us another way to look at how could the county, the district, look at potential management zones. So when we look at we see some similarities in the maps here as far as the different characteristics in the aquifers between the lower Trinity and the middle Trinity. Now, I didn't draw a potential management zone on the middle Trinity, but we can see that it follows a very similar pattern to what we're seeing on this particular, on the lower Trinity as well, especially when we're looking down here between, in the southern part of the county, between I-35 and, is that the Stillman Valley area, or recall correctly?
Yeah, approximately.
Thank you. So we're seeing some differences there. This particular management zone, the way that I drew it here to try to capture the differences in the eastern or in the western part of Bell County and the lower Trinity. This is really just following roads. You know, there's a lot of different ways that we can define management zones or potential management zones, either using the mapping technology that we have here, understanding that it can change frequently with changes in aquifer conditions or new tests. Here I followed what we had done back in, I believe, 2016, where we were first talking about management zones and the possibility of them. And we really just kind of looked at the differences in the county and drew a line straight up I-35. At that point, it was really just to try to easily communicate it. So this is really just kind of an illustration and not necessarily a firm recommendation on how to draw the lines. But some conclusions from the study is that we did see that the required spacing could certainly increase for some of those larger column pipe sizes. For the lower Trinity, we're looking at anything from a 6 to 8 inch. If we're looking at the county as a whole, we want to probably increase that to about a 1/4 mile in order to try to minimize the drawdown from new wells. And with anything greater than 8 inches, may want to actually increase that up to about 1 mile from existing wells. For the middle Trinity, anything greater than from 2 to 4 inches, results look like about a 1/2 mile spacing would be needed. And anything greater than 4 inches, it would be 1 mile. I have 4 to 6 there, but we really wouldn't expect to see anything more than a 6-inch well at the most. So, analysis of the data also really does suggest, and we saw some more of this that we weren't really able to incorporate into this analysis, but as Dirk alluded to earlier, some information developed by Alan and Vince, it helps to even reinforce more that there's the idea of management zones or areas is certainly reasonable, and these I feel like these data help. They suggest that as well. With that, if there's any questions on this particular analysis.
So Mike, this is Dirk. So really, these are things that the assigned stakeholder group where we revisit our spacing rules in the near future, and that may not be within the next 60 to 100 days, but this gives us some clarity. And I think, though, to help the board say what's a so what are we going to do with this? Well, we'll wait and get this the analysis based on this year's 3D model, the calibration and the new discernment next month from Alan and Vince, and then apply that and include all of you into these discussions with our stakeholder group, and then ultimately with the board as a whole.
Right. And to add to that, Dirk, I think there's going to be some additional information when Ian gives his conceptual model stakeholder meeting that can add to that as well.
Okay. It's great.
So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Dirk.
Dirk, I have some comments on the last report that Mike just presented. I think it's really good work. I really like seeing the pencil get sharpened, so to speak, over time. And I'll save most of my comments for once the stakeholder group starts meeting, but I think one of the big comments I wanted to point out, which I provided to Mike in some of the feedback I gave him from the draft report, the 50-foot of drawdown criteria that was used, I noted that 50-foot of drawdown criteria puts me out of water. So, in the Stillman Valley area, we are really, really challenged. And I don't think, I've kind of come to the conclusion over the last several years I've been sitting on the board that I don't think there's a solution to keep the groundwater available in our area. It is going to disappear, and we need to probably just get that information out so that public supplies can make up the difference for people that live in that area. Because it's inevitable that drawdown is going to occur and we're going to be the first to feel it. So that's, I think, the biggest takeaway from the great studies that Mike's been doing for us.
Well, and I will compliment Mike for the same reason, but I will also tell you that you will have the most discernment, and not to let the cat out of the bag too much, but Vince's work and his going back and looking at Mike's work and then getting some new understanding from drillers' reports and e-logs, you're bookended by some faults out there that, and I'm not going to say any more than that really is going to give us some additional understanding that there might actually be a defined area that exactly that, but not a broad area, but there's some, and as the way Brian Hunt referenced, studying the rocks and the stratigraphy out there is that Vince has some real new understanding that really couples with the faults that were discussed by Brian. And the future of understanding is going to necessitate a really robust effort to get a handle on what the aquifer system is, the Trinity's like, from our county all the way through to the Colorado River. It's going to be important. And I'm excited about that, but this has been a process, and these are just beginning points in terms of how we apply what we know to policy and rules. But there's a bigger understanding we need to have first, and that's going to be really, really interesting when you see that next month.
Good.
Mike, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, we'll go ahead and go to number 4, receive information related to the status of the Bell County Adaptive Management Coalition and the shared strategies related to the development of a special 4D rule for the Salado Salamander.
So I just want to brief and then allow, I'll just put a few talking points, because we're part of the Bell County Coalition. So our consultants with Natural Resource Solutions are listening in, and they can add anything. And Leland, you are much an expert on this, but there is a community meeting in Salado next week, and there's a copy. I just for visual, that was actually of the news release that'll be in the Salado paper as well as the other papers, hopefully by Monday or Sunday. And a link in that release that's going to be on our website of how people can video participate in the community meeting that's going to be at the elementary school. It's more of an update from the partners, the coalition partners, and more by the voice of the partners, which is Natural Resource Solutions, describing what we're up against, what this new milestone is, and that I've briefed you on before. But what I've put in the news release and put in the other mail outs is just a little bit of talking points of who is the coalition. And then in that presentation at yesterday's meeting, they've asked me to put together a little history on it. And Leland, you weren't able to be there, but that's part of the slides I'll get to Maddie and to Katie with Natural Resource Solutions tomorrow. But we just want to remember that the Judge Blackburn is leading the coalition and is fostering these meetings with the help of Bobby Whitson with Williamson County. And so when Natural Resource Solutions meets with the Wilco groups, there's one of the elected officials with them. And when the elected officials from Williamson County are there, bottom line is the picture on the left or the right of the slide, the 2019 is actually references in the slide that NRS gave us, but it's confirmed in the Hillis report, then the Devitt report that the Salado Salamander, the genetics goes all the way to the San Gabriel River, and then in our own study that the coalition paid through the reimbursable task order with Pete Diaz this past year, and then with Dr. Nice, you've seen those genetic discussions. His findings are going to be paralleled, and it just confirms the science. And so Williamson County is definitely, because of the new relationships, and that fostered by their commissioners court, their judge with our judge, I believe that we'll have a good path forward on resolving this for the community. But WSP is going to speak here. I'm going to have to turn this over to James Beach here in a second, because one of the regulatory mechanisms that we identified and was accepted back in 2013 when we submitted our comments with the help of Dr. Yelderman was this slide right here, the Springs of Salado. You saw Clara's synoptic water levels that just shows that the paths go, the groundwater moves to the east and then moves toward the Salado Spring Complex. And so with that, though, I asked WSP on the fly, and they jumped in. James and Rowett are both on the phone, and I'm going to just give them the reins on a slide set where they're just going to hit a few talking points, and it's busy slides, but what it amounts to is if we didn't have the stream flow gauge, if we disconnected ourselves from downtown proper, do we have enough statistical ability with our 4 monitor wells to call them a Jacobs well or an index well or a statistical index well, that we could do it without being inside the village? And so James is going to address that question for us right now. And so James, I'm going to put you over as the presenter, and you now have the reins.
All right. See if I can get in presentation mode here. Can y'all see that?
Yes, but you need to go up the top button, display, and see right there on your screen, change the display to it's a drop down at the very top of the screen nope. Go left. There you go. Past it to display settings.
Display settings.
Down right there. Switch presenter view. Up.
Up.
You needed to do the top one, not the bottom one. Yep. There it is. Working like a dream.
Okay, you got it now?
Yes, sir. You're looking good. And thank you, James, you and Rowett, for getting on top of this. And again, Maddie's with us. You got something happening too. You got a pop up on top of us, James. There you go.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out which one goes where here. Hold on. I apologize, guys. I collapsed that. Okay. Can y'all still see that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Apologies for the technical difficulties here. Yeah, as Dirk said about 10 days ago, he came to us and was asking a couple of questions about our ability to use the data and the GAM that we currently have for the Edwards and the northern section of the Edwards, and say something about tying together the DFC with the spring flow, using the water level information that y'all have been actively collecting over the last few years. And so I wanted to thank Rowett. Rowett is our modeler here in Austin, and has worked for the Water Development Board and does lots of modeling. He helped and did a lot of the work here as well. So he put together most of these slides, and we'll go through them real quickly and see if we can explain kind of what Dirk was talking about. So this is the slide that Dirk started with. Again, these slides are not polished because we've been on the fly trying to get this done quickly. This is a preliminary effort to try to get to some answers for Dirk quickly. The springs there, are circled in Salado. You can see the location of the wells there, the yellow orangish circles that have been monitored throughout the Edwards regularly throughout the last 7-8 years. And here's another depiction of that with the model data, or with the model grid.
Hey, James, may I tell them which one of those wells or what? The
Absolutely.
The well at the top with the red stick is it's cemetery well that Clearwater maintains, and it's a continuous well with TexWater Development Board, but it's somewhat on the down dip where the outcrop comes in there, that little area. The one that says is blue is actually the rest stop well at the on I-35. It's what we call the 7KX well, some people, but to us it's a rest stop well. We manage that with TWDB, and we also have a Texas Mesonet weather station adjacent to it. The green well is the well we call Patterson's Crossing well, and it's out southwest of town on 2843. And then the Williamson County well is not, it is across the county line. It's on the land owned by Texas State in the relationship with the Galt site, that foundation, and former Commissioner not Bill, I know Bill Schumann's listening, but it was Tim Brown, opened the doors and connections for us to not only have an Edwards continuous monitor well there, but adjacent to that one, about 100 yards away, or maybe 50 yards away, is a Middle Trinity monitor well. So those wells are continuous, managed, paid for by Clearwater to keep operational, but maintained by TexWater Development Board. So those are why the question by many in the regulatory realm want to know, hey, rather than just having a gauge in the creek, do you have the statistical capacity yet to identify these wells to predict before spring flow falls? Can you be more robust in your prediction of spring flow? And so when you see these numbers on the screen from this point forward, that's the wells: Cemetery, Rest Stop, Patterson's, and Galt.
Thanks, Dirk. Appreciate that. That's helpful. And so let's first look at simulated values. I guess the question is, why would we do this? We're trying to get back to if the model in its current form can be used to tie together the observations and water levels in those 4 wells back to spring flow, and is there a way to correlate and to somehow use the observed data as sort of another indicator of how the springs are going to respond, and is it a good do we have a good index well yet? Obviously, this is all preliminary work, and I'm gonna fly through some slides here. These are busy, as Dirk said, but this is what we get when we look at those 4 wells, and we look at the water levels in those wells in the current DFC run. If you look at the bottom of the time axis here, it goes from 2013 through 2020. There's a little bit more than that that's simulated, but what we're showing is in the model today, the DFC model that's used. If we look at the simulated water levels at those locations and the spring flow at Salado Creek, this is what we see. Now, in and of itself, it doesn't tell you a lot other than to say we can extract those data from the model and look at them. Now we look at the field data, and one of the things you see here is just the difference first off in the observed data in some of the wells is pretty flat. If you look at these on a different scale, tighter scale, you see that there's up to 5 foot of fluctuation in those wells typically. And then we see the Salado Creek. Now, the thing to remember about the observations in Salado Creek, we're looking, if you look at the right-hand axis, you see that those are some really big spike flows, which include, of course, all of the other flow that isn't, that's flood flow, not necessarily just the base flow from the aquifer. So those are our field measured values. And again, just to show you that those are there. And then when we move to try to compare those two, again, on a pretty busy slide here, I don't expect you to follow every curve, but let's just start with the green curve. And again, 2013 through 2020, you're looking at the Williamson well here. You can see the model data going up and down. You can see the field data much smoother. Again, as you get closer to the springs, the 3 wells that we talked about before here, each one of these are color coded. The field data is the solid line. The dashed line is the observed data. And so I'm sorry, the model data is the dashed line. And so you can see we wouldn't expect that the model would simulate the field data precisely. Most of this data wasn't even available when the model was calibrated, and so we wouldn't expect it to track necessarily perfectly. But what we're looking for is trends and how we might be able to use the model in its current form to help us find an auxiliary, index well or measuring a water level measuring in the aquifer to help us discern what spring flows might be. Again, this is a very preliminary look, but what you see is that at this scale, we don't see a whole lot of correlation in a lot of ways. This, of course, isn't conclusive, but when we started to look at the low flows, which is where we thought we were going to the focus should be, obviously, because that's where the target levels are. That's where the species are most vulnerable. That's where you want to focus as far as calibrating your model and having good monitoring metrics, so to speak, and targets. What we see is on the the blue and the black here, which is the Salado field measurements, discharge. We can see that in some cases, even the well that's close to the springs is they're not necessarily showing a very good correlation. You've got some negative correlation in some cases. In some cases, you see some positive correlation where you're seeing water levels increasing in a well, and then the springs are going up, spring flow's going up as well. In other places, you're seeing negative correlation. Again, it's one of those things that we started out with the question here of not how correlated are our index well or these selected Edwards wells that the district has been collecting data on for so long versus the springs. Our starting question was, how good is the model at helping us to determine a new DFC, a water level DFC, as opposed to a spring flow DFC, and if that is is it a reasonable tool in its current form to do that? And so when we look at the field data, we gain some insight into how the wells are correlated to spring flow. When we compare the modeled data to the field data, we get some other insight. But essentially, a point to remember here, which is a question that we started with when I talked to Dirk, 10 days ago, was we need to go back and look at the model and see, what the assumptions were for the DFC run. And when you do that, what you see is that, there's a 10 to 20, there's a 2010 to 2020 DFC run that sort of mimics a recharge sequence that is similar to that comes from the drought of record period in the 1950s. And so we wouldn't necessarily expect that when we look at simulated versus real field data here, we wouldn't expect these to match necessarily because it's a different recharge from a different time period. It's being repeated here for the DFC run, but we wouldn't expect those to match for multiple reasons. Number one, they weren't calibration targets. Number two, it was a completely different recharge sequence that's being used for the DFC run to try to capture the drought of record, which was appropriate for the DFC run because you're looking at very low flow conditions, and the drought of record would be illustrative there and helpful in quantifying things. So I've gone through a lot of a really busy graphs here. I want to move to some observations and recommendations I think that are critical from the preliminary assessment that we did. Number one, the DFC simulation, the predictive simulation, assumes that drought of record recharge from 2011 to 2020. It assumes higher pumping for that run than what you currently have, and so that's another difference. So there's two big differences there between the data that the district has collected in the last 7 or 8 years versus what is currently in the model. So the simulated and pumping recharge provide insight into the extremely low flow conditions, but we don't expect them to overlap. So due to the lack of overlap between the model calibration predictive period and the more recent monitoring done by the district for the wells and springs, WSP's preliminary GAM analysis is pretty inconclusive in regards to linking spring flow causality to groundwater levels. There may be some more correlation between the wells and the actual spring flow if we look at the actual data. But going back to Dirk's original question, can we use the current model in its current form to correlate well what our DFC should be from a head perspective? The model seems incapable of doing that at this point. And to ensure the practicality and the usefulness of the updated model, we recommend additional groundwater surface water interaction studies to seek to obtain kind of that causality between not just a correlation that might be somewhat accidental here and there, but really kind of the causality that you need in that correlation between measured spring flow and groundwater levels. We feel like there probably is a better connection between spring flow and water levels. If you measure in the right places, it may not be as solid as what we have on the San Antonio section with J17 in San Antonio, or in the Barton Springs segment and with some of the index wells they have. But it could be better than what we're seeing here, especially when we move to that next step of trying to come up with a DFC.
James, so before you get to your last points there, the takeaway for us then might be that it's as we learn from Clara's work in mapping the spring shed, that might also give us an understanding where we might intersect that ground flow with a monitor well from where those rainfall events, the predictability of that and where she maps that. Then we can connect the dots, but also it may be a heavy lift for the district, but it may be a necessary one to satisfy a special 4D rule. And I know our other consultants are listening here because some of US Fish, both the researchers have questioned me on this. Why are you not using index wells? Well, here today is enough solid evidence that we don't have index wells in the right location, nor does the model predict it in such a way. But the district may have to have an upper gauge to match to the lower gauge to satisfy the one regulatory mechanism is that we have hung our hat on is protecting spring flow under low flow conditions, which we are actually in the midst of the beginning of a drought. And we'll talk about that when we get later in the actual board action. But
Right.
this is definitely, I hope everybody understands why I felt this necessity to get this answer documented. I'm hoping, James, you can put this in the form of a memo too to help us communicate with our consultants that are listening in today as they package comments and put a defensible position on Clearwater's meeting its statutory requirements, both from a scientifically defensible and a legally defensible position. And that's
Right.
what at the beginning of the day, they're going to ask us to give them.
Right. Yeah, we can do that. And, finally, we recommend the regular communication with TWDB on the development of the updated, conceptual and numerical model for the northern GAM, Edwards GAM, to improve the calibration and simulation of groundwater levels and base flow estimates for Salado Creek watershed. So I think there is a better way to make sure that the next update of the model incorporates this more recent data from that y'all been collecting, and to ensure that it is calibrated as best we can to the drought of record, but similar to what EAA, Edwards Aquifer Authority, discovered and kind of has moved away from in their last model updates. Because they've spent so much time and resources collecting data in the last 10 to 15 years, that is really a much tighter data set than what they had in the 50s from the standpoint of pumping and recharge estimates, et cetera. It seemed counterintuitive to not use that as part of the calibration and to continue to stick with just the 1950 drought of record for calibration. And so that's one of the things that we feel like is critical in this next update, is to make sure that the data y'all collected recently is incorporated, and we don't necessarily expect that the current model would do well in helping us discern what a DFC should be from water level terms, because it just wasn't calibrated to that level. And so we need to move to the next chapter, so to speak, in model improvement and calibration and using the data that y'all have collected to make sure we've got the best tool available. Any questions?
I will add to this, James, I want to just point out that James is putting together a proposal for their interaction during the development of the conceptual model and what's going on right now. Actually, we've been notified by TWDB that Ian Jones, and so their role in helping us get our data into the new GAM. And so also then when they develop the numerical model. Now, Mike Keester has put together a proposal the last 2 years anticipating that, and just it didn't happen. But Ian Jones has contacted us all. He's invited many of us to a stakeholder meeting, including Dr. Joe and Stephanie, including Mike and including Rohit and James Beach. So the two different consulting firms are going to come to us with a proposal, what their role would be and what they think they could do to help us get our data into the new model. And so that's a part of why we have multiple consultants, I guess, is for their professional services. They have different perspectives, and Rohit may have a really storied background to help us with this. So, and Keester knows that he's on the call. He knows that we're asking them for additional information along these lines as well. You ready to go to the next?
Can I add one comment here? The coalition meeting that you spoke about earlier, Dirk, is on the 14th of July. It's at 6 p.m. at the Salado ISD cafeteria.
And all the folks on the call, we invite them to be there, both visually, virtually, or in person. And I understand that myself and Will are going to work with Don Ferguson tomorrow in the school to fix up the camera and be able to go virtual, but also to give us the ability to know what the social distancing capabilities are. The village has taken that news. We put the letter together for everybody, and they have mailed it to every property owner that's in that defined potential critical habitat, which is all businesses. And they have been all notified that, hey, you're welcome to this community meeting to know what the coalition's been doing on your behalf and what our steps forward are, and answer questions. We got a good team working for us at this time. Leland, do you want to add anything to the coalition?
Now, the only thing, Dirk, we don't need to post anything on that thing, do we?
I'm glad you asked that. Judge Blackburn asked me to go ahead and post it, that potentially one or more, or two or more of you would be listening in, and they're going to do that with the Commissioner's Court as well, just as a protection in case somebody questioned it. And he encouraged me to do that. Is that okay with you?
Well, I think we need to, just in case anybody else on the board here wants to come in on that meeting.
I would really like for them all to listen in if they can.
Okay. I don't have anything else. Thanks, James. Okay, number 5, receive information concerning Groundwater Management Area 8, related round number 3 of DFC development.
So on your screen, and I'm asking, is my screen up right now on workshop item 5? Okay. Just a visual right there, just reminding you all that James is working with Velma Danielson on behalf of all of the districts representing these areas. There is a lot of counties that don't have a district, but as James and myself and Mike Keester, we presented the pumping data. We offered that to GMA 8, both in Williamson and Northern Travis. And that report, if anybody would like to have a copy of it, I can get it to them as well. And then Gary and I will either be on a virtual call. Gary's the alternate. I'm your representative on the board. And Gary, correct me if I'm wrong. We've said this each month, but we always like to document it. It is August the 7th, right?
That is correct.
Okay. That's all I have on that item.
Okay, thank you. Number 6, receive information concerning the 2020 Groundwater Management Plan Renewal process.
All right, I was telling you, this is a year of heavy laden, and I know I've been spending a lot of time with NRS and working on the coalition issues, but Tristan has been assigned to help me prepare a draft of the necessary changes in language in the management plan. So this is what I've sent to Stephen Allen, who is our connection. He works with groundwater districts. When your 5 years are up, he helps you do that. And so what we're doing now, by the end of the month, we'll send our first draft version with some just necessary changes. These are not rule changes, but just how we manage the district. And we'll update a few of the items in there with some specificity, meaning we don't go into classrooms like we once did. We have our mobile classroom, those kinds of things. August 12th, we'll brief you on the next steps and needs based on, hopefully, if we get that to Stephen in time, he can get it back to us before the 12th. Then in the month of August, we would convene a stakeholder group if need be at your disposal, if you feel like, to review any substantive changes that we're recommending to you. And if we want to also at the same time, even though the rule changes, potential management areas, management zones, those kinds of things would be a part of that same discussion, but they're not incorporated into the management plan. The rules are where those would be. The other is, though, September 9th, we'll present the draft of the new, and it's rather than just the acronym is a GMP for the board. We're looking closely at those educational objectives and fine tune those, like I said a minute ago. Then in September, the staff sends that Immediately after that meeting, we send the final suggestions from you, the board, to TWDB. They review it one last time according to the state checklist, which means is it legally designed the way it's supposed to be? And they do deny sometimes. There's been a district recently that's was non-compliant because they didn't they didn't want to make the changes, but we're statutorily required to have it in a certain way, and our history has been that we do that. We have to then hold a public hearing on it, which would be at the October 14th meeting, and then you would direct me to analyze and apply any recommendations from the general public. Then you drop a gavel on that plan on November 11th. The Water Development Board says that in the communication meeting simply says November 19th, I have to have the final version approved by you all and adopted by the board, which means that's the 90 days before our expiration date, which is February 19th, 21. So then on December 19th of 20, the date is required for to have the plan, the actual hard copy has to be sent UPS to the executive director. I'll meet that because I'll do that appropriately between November 19th and December 19th. There's no action on this today, but this is a pretty heavy lift, but Tristan and I think we can put it together, and we're already beginning to put the addendums that go in that plan. I don't know, Leland, you and well, the three of you in the boardroom have been through this process either once or twice already. It's not really that complicated, but it is new for Scott and for Jody, and I'll make absolutely sure everybody's on the same page when we get to that.
Okay. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay, number 7, discuss review items of interest concerning the FY 2021 budget development process.
So with the calendar that I sent you, that's on the screen that I've circled blue today, that we're just essentially looking at the framework. I'm hoping you all take time to look at it and ask questions today. And I'll just point out that next month, you will set the preliminary tax rate. The recommendation we are leaving with you until we get the certified values based on the preliminary values, the reducing the tax to the no new revenue rate, but yet incorporating the new value, which is new businesses, new homes, and I'll show you where that comes from, would generate $754,499. Those we're still going by the preliminary totals. Some entities tell their boards that they'll get them by the 25th of April. I don't count on that. The final drop dead deadline of all appeals and for the appraisal district is August 7th. So I'm planning to get the data in August 7th. Anytime before that be appreciated. There is a lot of appeals going on right now. What they sent us was if we stayed at our current tax rate, that would have been $819,811, which we know we don't take full advantage of those increased property values. What I'm recommending to you to think about between now and August, and then you all can prepare your thought processes where we need to be, whether we even take it down another notch. It's your choice. But I always say, set your preliminary tax rate where you think you want it to be, knowing if you're going to lower it after the public hearing in late August, you can do that, but you can never raise it above that preliminary tax rate. The bottom line is this: what I showed you last month, the new taxable rates, and they talk about the how that's calculated, and I showed you that with the 0.00329. And then the new value was based on that 608 million that was at 290,000, whatever, added to the tax rolls. We don't give any exemptions other than the 5,000 for homestead, but I've had a lot of calls, and I had a very distraught lady call me this week, concerned that her husband is 100% disabled vet, and they have not had to pay property taxes in recent years, but she did get a letter from the appraisal district that simply said, before exemptions, your potential taxes based on your new property values could be this much. And she didn't understand the caveat in the sentence that said before exemptions. And with her exemption, she's 100, she will not be paying any tax at all and hasn't for the last 2 years. So she's a good example of people who get concerned. And I've encouraged her to speak directly to her state representative and to other public officials to because she's on a very fixed income, a $1,500 or $300 a year property tax bill would be debilitating for her. And so that's why there's a lot of chatter. People get scared of that letter they get. And I simply went through her tax history and sent her that property information. Again, at her age, she has no connectivity to the internet. And the only dialogue she's had with anybody was the letter from the appraisal district, which is what we all get. Next month, you'll finalize the budget. What I want to show you here is it's in the documents I gave you. I would tell you we will go item by item through these. I will have them prioritized and recommended to you. Once I get all of these proposals from different people, these are just benchmark totals on the left-hand side, right-hand side, and some I haven't received yet. But I will make sure that you have it in plenty of time, and you'll see priorities, and you'll also have some documents in support of these numbers. But they're in there in the draft that you got to give you a feel for where we might be on our scientific studies. Other than that, there's a lot of other things in the packet. You've seen those before. The guiding principles behind how you've guided me on developing budgets in the past, and those are in your packet. I can show those if people online want to see them. If you direct me to do that, I can actually do that.
Okay. Is that all for number 7, Dirk?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We will need a short break. We're going to need about a short 5-minute break, then we'll start the meeting.
All right.
You'll mute us there, Jerry. Okay, we'll go ahead and start the board meeting now on July 8, 2020. If everyone will please stand, we will have David lead us in the invocation and Gary with the pledge of allegiance.
Let's pause for a moment. Heavenly Father, we're so thankful that we're gathered together, but Lord, I'm again reminded that Jody's not here physically with us. It's just like missing a person that's part of you. And so, though he's here electronically, he's just not here with the option of being here physically. So, Lord, be with our invited guests that we had today, both physically here and electronically. And Lord, also those that are in uniform, our military police, our EMS, of course, fire department, and of course our military. Just lead, guide, direct us, Lord, as we make those decisions today. And these things that we ask you in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for being here today. Do we have any public comments? We'll give everybody time if they have any public comments.
We didn't have anybody fill out a form either, but I know your tradition is if anybody's on the call, they're welcome to.
Welcome to doing so. Not hearing any, we'll go ahead and go to number 3. Approve the minutes of the June 10th, 2020 board meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Okay, motion made by Gary, seconded by David. Any discussions or changes? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Jody? Jody, are you still on? Okay, motion carried. Okay, thank you. Jody also voted aye. Motion carried 5-0. Discuss, consider, and take action if necessary to accept the monthly financial report for June 2020 as presented. Do you hear a motion on that?
So made.
Motion made by David, seconded by Scott. Do you hear any questions, changes, anything? Okay, hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Jody?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carried 5-0. Discuss, consider, and take action to accept the monthly investment fund report of TexPool 449 and TexPool Prime 590 account as presented. Do you hear a motion to accept?
I'll motion to make.
Motion made by Gary, seconded by David. Do we hear any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Jody?
Aye.
Motion carried 5-0. Thank you. Discuss, consider, and take action to accept the quarterly deferred compensation employee retirement program account as presented. Y'all all have that in the packet. Do I hear a motion on that?
Make a motion, we accept it.
I'll
Motion made
second.
by Scott, seconded by Gary. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Jody?
Aye.
Okay, motion carried 5-0. Discuss, consider, and take action to accept the FY20 line item budget amendments as requested. Dirk, you want to go over that? You or Shelley?
Go ahead, Dirk.
Okay. We have a bill from LRE that was where we are utilizing some more of our geotech. His advice, especially on as we conducted the study of pumping in Williamson and Travis County, and then our recommendation that I showed you, there was some costs associated with that. We do have extra money in the geologging, but we'd like to leave $3,750 in there. So we're asking you to move that amount. That gives you a balance because we do have some additional technical meeting coming up, GMA 8, and we're going to be short there. This is the heavy year. You've seen where we've returned money back year after year after year on GMA technical activities, but this is the year we're finishing it up. The other is we've renegotiated the bills that were somewhat high last month, but yet we're in terms of our permit review from Lloyd Gosselink, they've reduced the charge as we had talked about before. I've worked out the details on that and redefined our methods with them. But each year we put half of our funds for geoscience reviews. We break it into scientific or permit reviews, a geoscience evaluation of $15,000 and a legal evaluation. This time we're spending more this year on legal opposed to geoscience, and so that's why we're suggesting to balance that legal permit review out to pay this final bill. We only have $993 in there, so we're short $2,000, but it's the same essential group as we've done in the past, and so it's moving the necessary amount from the geoscience side. Lloyd Gosselink also through the important aspect of Ty Embry working with us on GMA, DFC, and MAG related. That line item is we had used up the remaining funds, and he even called me to say our time is. They vetted that. He helped us put the talking points to make sure our recommendations were legally defensible in the GMA8. So we did not use a lot of our drought contingency plan update monies that we bookmarked. So that I'm suggesting we move that $1762.50 from that other line item over to the GMA DFC.
Okay.
Also, you will notice on the second request for Lloyd or the first request for Lloyd Gosselink, the permit review, I made a correction on your packets. I was 5 cents off, and so I've corrected that on your packets. I know what's showing on the screen is not what you have on your packet.
Okay.
Right. There is no 5 cents, huh?
No.
That
finger.
I think you covered it, Dirk, but on the first one, the LRE, you're anticipating we're going to have more expense on GMA8 before year end.
Yes, I do. I do believe we will, because we have the August 7th, and then there'll be another meeting in September, most likely. So that's why I suggested moving a notch more to leave us a balance, because we've had, always remember there's always some question that others are putting forward, and sometimes we have to get a scientific evaluation. Many times I catch it, understand it, but when we don't, we've got to get an opinion, very similar to what we just did with WSP giving us opinion. Could we, do we have enough data that we can move to index wells? And that's a needed question, not only during the DFC process, but also during the coalition, the negotiation on a special 4D rule. So it's critical that we be able to get that done. And that's why I was feeling to put portion of that over there.
Okay, if you would, I know in the past, all of us have, I think, September 30th year ends or whatever. Try to get them where they get us, invoice before year end on that thing.
They will. Oh, you're talking about Lloyd Gosselink? Yes, so we can close the books?
No, the GMA8 people.
Oh, okay. We're not anticipating, but I'm glad you said that. I will talk to Drew Satterwhite. He's the one who handles that. That's a great question.
Yeah, because we'll need to get that one. They're always kind of drag their feet on getting us, the reimbursement for them up there too.
Yeah, that administrative fees.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Okay, do I hear a motion to make those transfers?
So made.
Motion made by David. Do I hear a seconded by Gary? Any questions, anything, discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed, same sign. Jody, how do you vote?
Aye.
Okay, motion carried 5-0. Thank you. Okay, number 8, we don't have that available yet, so if I'd like to have a motion from the board that we go ahead and table number 8.
Make a motion that we do table it.
Okay, motion by David to table, seconded by Scott. Anything else?
I'll just
favor of tabling that motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Jody?
Aye.
Aye, passed 5-0. Any comments there, Dirk?
Yes, I just want to point out that Mike has completed the drawdown analysis, and then we're also going to get some additional technical information that is from Alan Standen that confirms Mike's work, and we'll have a memo from them and a presentation by Vince, and it will also speak to some geological understanding that we didn't previously have that really indicates why we're seeing some drawdowns and the really significant impacts right where Scott's property is. And so we want to incorporate those additional memos into that resolution next month.
Okay, very good.
And then we'll present that to our legislators. We'll present that data to TWDB and TCEQ officials as well.
Okay. Number 9, discuss, consider, and take action to conduct an annual performance review of the general manager in accordance with District Bylaws Article VI, Section 6. If it's okay with the board, I would like to go ahead and call executive session on that one and discuss the general manager's review with him in private. So if we would go ahead and Jody, we're going to go ahead. What we're going to do is call you. Scott's going to call you on your cell phone, on his cell phone, and we'll have you on the cell phone.
We're going to mute.
Yeah, go ahead and mute.
And just for the record, you can go into executive session. I hope you can hear me. Executive session for the purpose of personnel or legal advice. In this case, it's personnel.
Well, you know,
It might take me just a second to get back on live.
There's 8 people.
Okay.
We'll wait for you to get back on.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you for the nice comments.
Thank you. I guess I need to start checking my Clearwater. Okay, we came out of executive session, and, at 13 minutes till 5, we went over personnel with Dirk and staff, and, Dirk, we were just complimenting them for doing a good job and doing everything that we were asking of him, so. Okay, let's go ahead and go to number 9, discuss, consider, and take action to conduct, oh, we just did that one. Number 10, general manager's report. Dirk?
Is Jody back on? We said we'd wait for him.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Okay, Jody, you're back on. I ain't found Dirk. Dirk may be muted.
Yep, I'm on now.
Okay, Dirk, we went ahead and read number 10 on office, general manager's report. If you'd go ahead and do that.
I will do that. What you see there, let me grab my notes. Just want to, just reiterate that we do have a COVID-19 safety plan in place and that we adhere to that. You've seen the posting on our website, and we're trying to maintain social distance in the office, just those that are listening still. It's very important to me that we adhere to that just for the safety of our staff and our clients. You heard me say earlier that Dr. Joe and Clara and Stephanie are working with Will. Will's been just tremendous already. He's a real asset to the office. Just let you know that on the 17th of July, the applications are ready. We won't send those out. People that want to apply for either Precinct 1 or Precinct 3 can begin to do that. The ASR Coalition, Scott, you were on the call the other day, the very first workshop, just kind of lay out things and now I've really worked directly with Intera to tell them, okay, call and have video conferences and build a relationship with those entities. And they definitely are moving and talking and asking a lot of questions. The meeting today with Travis County, that study, I would hope that if there is others that pay, that we might be able to participate to some degree as a support. You saw how many funding partners it took to do that atlas. I hope but I understand they're redirecting their attention more to the Hays County interaction. Other than that, on the screen, you'll see that the Edwards, if you look at your production reports, you'll see those in a moment. We're pretty high production on the Edwards aquifer, and you can see we moved into stage 1. One trigger that automatically, when it gets there, and it dropped into that 12.38 CFS. So we're mailing out notices to all private well owners and permits and putting an ad in the newspaper in Salado to let the general public know. We're really encouraging them to reduce their demand on the aquifer by 10%. You'll notice that the next one up is the Trinity. It has to be in stage 1 on PDI for 28 days. So we're 14 days out. But I will tell you we're preparing the notices, sending that out. Unless we get a really big rain, it's going to be hard to see that move back into no drought within the 14-day window. It'll probably go down unless we get some rain. I've looked at the numbers. So we'll be notifying permit holders. There's so many of the Trinity well owners, except in the high use areas based on our information. So we'll be notifying people in River Ridge Ranch and Hidden Springs that both if you have an Edwards well, they'll get a notice on the Edwards, and Trinities, they'll get, those are our highest use by domestic well owners on tracts less than 10 acres. Just a monumental task for us. Other than that, that's all I have for today.
Okay. Let's go ahead and go to number 11, receive the monthly report. Y'all have that in your packet. Look over that. If you got any questions, you call staff. Director comment. Gary?
As I said before, I think every single one of our staff members have stepped up several levels to get all this stuff done. And with the situation that with the Fish and Wildlife lawsuit was filed, this team here has really gone way out of their normal work duties to make it all happen. And Dirk has been a great leader, and I've watched him in the meetings with the judge, etc. It blows my mind that this environmental group is more concerned about a salamander than they are the people in the water and etc. But we're there, we have to do it, and we appear to be on track on everything. And so thank you all. Thanks to staff, Dirk and Shelley and Kristen and Corey and everybody. Thank you very much.
Okay. Scott?
I'll just echo what Gary said and thank staff for sticking with it in these weird times we're in, and adjusting to kind of operations. I think it's commendable. Everybody's doing a great job.
David?
Dittos to what Gary has stated, but my biggest concern under managership is, the technical side is what bothers me the most. To be really proficient in that, understanding what groundwater is. But we're fortunate. I think our real asset continues to be, thank goodness, our general manager, and that he understands all the complexities involved, not only in people skills, management skills, but also his ability to understand all of the technical aspects of groundwater and what it does for our board here. And the other part of that, of course, is not having Jody here means a lot to me. He just plays an important role to all of us. And so, Jody, take care of yourself. Hope to see you soon. And the staff, of course, emulates exactly what our general manager is. We have really a really good staff here, and we're fortunate to have that. I want to thank you for it.
Thank you, David. Jody?
Just touching on what the other three directors said, we're probably one of the premier groundwater districts, and that's why we are, because of the general manager and the staff that we have. Thank you very much for all the hard work y'all do.
Thank you, Jody. Stay safe. My only comment is, when you look into the budget for next year, the salamander is costing us a bunch of money that I would much rather be spending doing other science.
Yeah.
But we're going to have to lay out a bunch of money because of the salamander issue.
Yeah.
It's not what I want, but it's what we have to do.
We're being forced to.
That's going to put a big hit on the budget on stuff that I would rather not see this year, but we don't have a whole lot of choice. So, be aware of that when we get into the budget stuff next year. And Dirk will try to get the science that we can do the stuff we absolutely have to do, and top priority, and then we'll go on down the road for another year then after that. So that's all I have. Of course, the excellent job that the staff and Dirk's doing. Okay, number 13, discuss agenda for the next meeting. Shelley.
I don't really have anything on my plate. Dirk, do you?
Well, I put it up on the screen for you, and that just so we could, WSP is going to present the results of the sensitivity GAM run. So the GMA 8 has, we've got a GAM run that will issue new mags. But what I wanted to know was if we increased our pumping at the same time Williamson and Travis County at 25% over what was in the presentation, and then 50%. And what does that do to the aquifer? I think sometimes having sensitivity runs put a perspective of what it means to overpump from the aquifer. The Trinity GAM is a lot more sensitive and a lot more correct than our Edwards GAM, which is being done. There's also going to be that, so that'll basically be those research presentations by James and his group. Brant Kenichi, that's worked for us with James, and when Keester was there, lives in Berlin and has been working distance for his bosses. But I understand he's making a professional change. The other, though, is the thing that I'm excited about is, and Keester has seen it, and so has WSP. We're all on the same page with the presentation from Alan Standen and Vince Claus next month. We've paid them some money to work on it and to really drill down. Why are we seeing these drawdowns? Is there some geological reasons in addition to overpumping, and just an incredible, I feel really good that we're in the hands of the right people. So also we'll discuss the status of the Bell County Adaptive Management Coalition's efforts with fish. That'll always be on there. Most importantly, the two action items will be set the preliminary tax rate. That tax rate can be set whatever, but when you land on and set your budget and then set your final tax rate at the public hearing, I believe that's the 26th of next month. I'll look at it to be sure. Yes, the 26th. That particular number you set, we can't go over, but it's okay later when we make our final decision to drop it even more. You'll also, by resolution, I'll have the order to call the general election. Then the posting goes on, and then I sign the contracts with the Bell County Elections Office for the November 3rd election.
Okay.
Anything else you think we need on there, I can add.
Dirk, we need to add, bring off the table number 8.
Oh, yes, bring off the table number 8, right. And that'll be good. Yes, and I'll have a proposed date that we meet with Water Development Board and our legislators about that.
Okay, Scott's got an issue, question.
Yeah. Dirk, I just, as you were going through this, started thinking about where we're at in the year, and something I haven't heard any talk about is what are the effects of COVID on the TAG Summit?
Oh, I'm glad you said that. I did get information on that. We will be sending a notice to you all. It will go virtual. We'll have the chance to reduce the hotel has made a big change on it. It's in San Antonio, and so there's a lot more restrictions, and they've notified. I can't believe that I got the information on Friday after we had posted, but you can participate. We've already registered you all, but the registration fees will be dramatically reduced. And of course, the viability of the organization is to still have their annual event because it pays probably about 60% of our expenses. But with the path forward that Leah has laid out is a good one, and everybody that's a sponsor will be able to adjust their sponsorship. They're sending that information out next week or the end of this week. My encouragement to each of you would be that you still participate at the reduced rate and there is some really good presentations. The reason I say this is it will be successful. TWCA did that, and our board meeting for TWCA, which each of you don't go but I go, was very successful, and the actual presentations were spot on. And they use a similar platform to this, but it's called GoTo Webinar by the same platform, where the speakers are back and forth, and anybody that wants to ask questions of a speaker, you click a button, and you basically raise your hand or you type your question in. And there was as many as 400 on one of the sessions I listened in on, and it was very beneficial and very timely.
Okay, and you may have some people that couldn't come to the meeting that can go virtual though.
That can't. That's right.
Yeah,
And
they
that
can actually go virtual, but they couldn't attend the meeting. So
right.
So okay,
It's gonna change the registration, but Leah had to make a decision once she was notified that we had to limit the number of attendees because of the limited space.
correct. Yeah, it'd be hard. You'd have to have the whole thing spread out 6 feet apart.
We're very disappointed for districts and myself in particular. I'm very disappointed, but I support her decision.
Oh, I agree and understand. What I get out of these things is talking to the other people from the other districts. I mean, that's what I get so much out of it, is talking to them, not, And
I get educated by the vendors that help support. I talk to them about their latest in technology or whatever their business is, and that's how I learn stuff.
I'm gonna miss that. Miss seeing my buddies down there. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're
Anything else?
saying that maybe 1 or 2 directors go and the rest go virtual or something like that?
Everybody's gonna go virtual.
Everybody will be virtual. Be nobody in attendance.
You
Yeah.
don't have to eat
Okay.
virtual.
Well, the only thing, Dirk,
We don't have any travel
how
expenses.
are they gonna do? Are they gonna have breakout sessions? How will they do breakout sessions? They just won't have those.
They'll send us some information that you will then, I will send to you, and you will just prioritize, tell us what sessions you want to be in. And then you get an actual document, like Leland, you'll get it in both your district email and your personal email and then you get a reminder that simply comes up on your computer and you click that button and you're a participant. Okay. And there's the people that are presenters are doing the same thing. So you can get in and stay on the general sessions the whole time, but then the actual concurrent sessions or shorter versions, you get just a link specifically to that. It's just a button you click. What's good is it's the same platform we use.
This will be the first time we do this where Leland doesn't complain about how much money we had to spend to do it.
That would be a point too.
Because we won't have hotel rooms or meals.
That's right.
No travel time?
Well, yeah, the only issue I have, if I do it, it's hard for me to keep from getting interrupted. And you're probably the same way. I mean, I'm constantly interrupted by staff. Yes. I don't take phone calls. I can block that stuff, but it's just hard to do it from the office.
I actually have a sign with all the recent online meetings. I have a sign that I put on my door and I close it that says online meeting in progress, do not disturb. But it stops probably 80% of the interruptions. I still get people that come in and look in the window and go.
Yeah, that's the only issue I got out of it. It's tough, to do it at work, and I can't do it at home because my internet's, like Cody's and Tristan's. So.
Yeah. And we could set that room right there up if you wanted to collectively be. We can also do it in a group where you maintain social distancing, especially with us not knowing what's on the horizon. You may be able to come here for the general sessions and be interactive that way.
Yeah, we can bring in lunch. Hey, we can even bring in lunch.
Yeah.
And Shelly can give us, some refreshments.
That's right.
I like that idea.
Now Leland, remember when this is.
It's dove season.
That's right. We don't want to hear no gunshots going off.
Hey, look at it. We can leave here at 5 and go hunting though.
I like that idea a lot better than sitting at home.
Yeah, Dirk, we'll talk about that. That may be something that's viable for us here.
It'd be far better. Yeah, I'd like.
Okay.
All right.
Did we lose Dirk?
No, he's still there.
Nope, I'm here. I just had a phone question sent to me, but and when is the next board meeting? And so it's August the 12th.
Yeah, that's what we did. When's the next board meeting?
The 12th of August.
Well,
August 12th.
And we have 2 meetings next month,
Yeah.
correct?
Yes, August the 12th, and then the public hearing will be on August the 26th, and we'll finalize the budget at that time.
And as you know, under Gersbach's directions, we always have to more than just a 10-minute meeting. I want to get the money's worth out of everybody, so we're gonna have whatever else needs to go to the meeting, we can do it then too.
That's right. We'll try to add a few more things.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, we're gonna adjourn the meeting at 5:05, and it lasted shorter than I thought it was gonna be. I thought it was gonna be longer than that. Thank you, Dirk.
Thank y'all.